Hello there, and welcome back to Roz Knight, Squeeze the Quo. I am Roz Knight. Thank you for coming back, and finally, I am getting to Steve and the FBI with the Surviving the Survivor. Jeff Woods, former FBI, which is where this is my focal point of what's had me start this channel. What he said about Steve, as well as a former FBI agent, Navy SEAL, Jonathan Gillum, he is brought up in here as well, that they both were alleging, almost putting out there, that Steve is the one that went there and massacred the 4 students. So that got me doing this video and listening to Ann Burgess and Gary Picotto on it is a mass murder, not so much a serial killing. It could be, have those same components. It could be, has some of those elements, but we have to look at it as a mass murder, which is what I did. And I also looked into that because of the wounds and the way that it was committed, with it being such a brutal stabbing, that it is a sexually motivated crime. Even though there is no overt sexual assault, as the MPD said in their press conference, that after the fact, where Ethan Chapin's parents brought it to the nation prior to them, said there was no sign of sexual assault, which means that it was not, which does not mean that it's not a sexual assault in nature. As you see, I've got some pictures. There's some uncanny resemblance of Hannah there that I saw other people had commented about in other people's videos, as well as there's another uncanny resemblance of a police officer who is with Brian Koberger when he's brought to Moscow, Idaho, at the airport, who looks a lot like the officer in the January 6th riots. So I put those pictures up as well. So we're getting into that. We're getting into December 5th, what a former FBI agent says, as well as December 7th, looking at 4chan videos, looking at the military aspect of it, that military, and there's some intersectionality with fraternities being in ROTC program, and that there is a lot of rising gang membership within the military, which was unbeknownst to me. And this is brought up by Jeff as well as Gary about gang, possibility being gang involvement. Jeff Woods, the former FBI, has 20 years of experience with the MS-13 and 18th Street Gang, which you'll hear Gary say they are no longer part of the FBI database, which is interesting. As you just saw in the video right here in this picture, I believe that is photoshopped. So we're doing the 4chan sometimes where there is smoke, there is fire, and sometimes it's just biasness, own personal agendas that are being brought up. As I've said before, this is objective commentary. I'll be using explicit and illicit language, and you always formulate your own opinion. And I use this language because, like, I like to use Mr. Rogers as an example. If it's mentionable, it's manageable. So you have to make the unmentionable manageable. Thank you for anyone who used the polls that I put out on my channel, on my page, because I'll be using those results in this video. So, without further ado, let's get to it. And I have my little video there of Green Velvet, who I love. I just like to use that to get me a little motivated, because it's going to be a long one. Hopefully not as long as the last one, but I know the last time I got a little sappy and little talky talks. This time I plan on not doing that, just getting straight to business. But 140 subscribers, Waddy waddy woohoo! You're fabulous. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. So let's get to it. First, let's look at, and we'll be using Chronicles Olivia as well as papers as well. Lots of papers. Highlighting, of course. And here we go. This is Greg, and she is talking about the wounds.
In this, growing mystery, these new details are significant, and I wonder how a mind like yours would process them. The fact that one of these girls had far worse injuries than the other, and yet was sleeping in a room that wasn't hers in the middle of the night when these murders happened. What do you make of that?
We have to be careful that we don't overinterpret the information. And one hypothesis is that she was targeted. Perhaps that may explain the number of wounds that are excessive in her. But I've had other cases where I've worked with multiple murders where one victim has been subjected to the most violence, and turns out that wasn't a targeted victim. It was the person who had put up the most resistance and enraged the killer. So the killer inflicted more wounds on that person, even though that person wasn't specifically targeted. So we could be dealing with anything like that. So it's important not to get tunnel vision on a given hypothesis. Important to have multiple competing hypotheses and then let the evidence sort that out and support one and maybe dismiss the other. So you have to be a little bit careful with that.
Okay, so I like what he says there. I agree. So let's get into this paper of stranger sexual homicide. And I chose this one because they're saying that Brian Koberger, who is a stranger to them, as we see here, stranger sexual homicide and exploratory behavioral analysis of offender crime scene actions. And this is from the Journal of Sexual Aggression, and it came out in 2020. And it's Routledge is the publisher, and this is, I want to say, overseas, Great Britain, that did this research. And I use this for the stranger, but also for what he says about defensive wounds. And we'll learn that being a stranger and doing this is very rare. It's plausible, but it's very rare. It's most likely done by a person that they know and or an acquaintance. So let's see here what he just said about it being defensive and to not overinterpret. Right here. The instrumental expressive nature of physical violence. The instrumental expressive classification is based on the goal or rewards derived from violence. Instrumental violence seeks to achieve non-aggressive goals and involves hitting the victim in order to accomplish them. Expressive violence seeks to cause injury to the victim, and so the goal is not simply to hit them, but to hurt them, perhaps while experiencing emotions such as anger or fear, or holding negative views of the victim or victim type. In relation to homicide, the previous research, what they found is the most relevant in a series of studies. They found the crime scene actions of homicidal offenders reflect instrumental and expressive themes. Instrumental homicides, for example, may involve an impulsive attack using a weapon obtained from the crime scene, indicating the offender had no homicidal intent before encountering their victim, which we know that they like to have knives from previous pictures. And as we've learned demographically, the state of Idaho has a lot of hunting within their area, but also the military aspect, the ROTC, which we'll get into. But as well as Stephen has said in the 48 hours that he brought a kill kit, which means to me what that meant, it was planned. But as we go, by contrast, expressive homicides may involve multiple injuries to various parts of the body beyond that necessary to cause death. In cases of sexual assault, instrumental violence may indicate an opportunistic sexually motivated assault, which in some cases result in the victim's unintended death or a death aimed at silencing a potential accuser. So that's what he is saying. That sometimes they got the worst, like with Kaylee is what they're bringing about, that the wounds are different, as he said in the December 4th, how the deaths don't match. It could be because it was used to, it was unintended death or a death aimed at silencing a potential accuser. Expressive violence within sexual assaults may indicate sadism or anger, hatred towards women, and include actions leading to the victim's intended death, such as gratuitous violence, torture, cruelty, mutilation of the victim's body, and insertion of foreign objects in the victim's bodily orifices. An international body of research supports the instrumental expressive classification of physical violence and allows for national differences to be factored out. Despite this, two issues remain. First, although some of the existing instrumental expressive studies include sexual killings, none have explored whether this dichotomy applies exclusively to sexual homicides, let alone those involving strangers. Now, when the MPD said there was no signs of sexual assault, that does not mean that that this was not a sexually motivated crime from what we've learned from these papers. And you will also hear with Anne saying the type of wounds will tell you what the underlying cause is and what was the motive. Further research is therefore required to determine whether the instrumental expressive classification has any utility for understanding stranger sexual homicides. Second, some studies suggest that instrumental expressive types can be further refined as various subthemes have been found to exist within them. Examples include instrumental opportunistic and subtheme of Fox and Allen's expressive defensive subtheme. So this research paper is using two different forms of research to look further into these types of homicides. And this is a mass murder, as Gary Picotto has said, but the FBI is looking at it as serial killing, which, as Gary said, it may have those elements, but you have to look at it as a mass murder. In order to do that, you have to look at these categories. Again, however, the absence within these studies of an exclusive focus on sexual homicide means further research is required to determine whether meaningful subthemes beyond instrumental expressive exist within such killings, especially those involving strangers, which is what they say Bryan Kohberger is, but it's very unlikely. It's very rare. It could be an anomaly, but you have to keep it open like that FBI agent said. The overt and covert nature. Whilst determining the presence of physical violence within a sexual homicide may be relatively straightforward due to it relating to the cause of death, the same cannot be said for the sexual component, as this may differ between individual killings, both in degree and kind. Many sexual homicides for example, include overt sexual acts such as vaginal penetration, whilst classifying a stranger homicide that includes such acts as sexual is reasonable, as they clearly indicate the killing was sexual. So there you go. You know it was because you were able to determine that. But when you're not able to, the absence of such acts does not necessarily mean a stranger homicide was not sexual, as some killings may contain covert sexual dynamics. That is, although sexual homicides may not always include erection, ejaculation, and intercourse, they may include other acts indicating a sexual killing. These may include victim attire or lack of attire, exposure of the victim's sexual body parts, sexual positioning of the victim's body, and evidence of substitute sexual activity, interest, or fantasy. Now, I really wanted to look at this because Jonathan Gillum brought up, as well, of possibly Steve being the murderer, but he also brought up that in order for Kaylee and Maddie to be, for their act of homicide, the perpetrator had to lay them on top of each other, which I find very odd. But after learning about this and going through all of this, part of me wants to say he's maybe hiding the fact of the sexual positioning, which will tell us what type of homicide it was in nature. But I don't, as I said, I'm trying to be objective, and these are my personal opinions, and you make your own judgments. But also, it's been very interesting with the interest or fantasy, how we were learning about the Delphi murders, how that was a fantasy or of an interest, meaning Odin. Those females' bodies, those poor victims, those little girls, were positioned in such a way to the symbology, their interest of Odin. It's a fantasy. Additionally, various methods of killing may indicate a sexual killing such as multiple stabbings or asphyxiation. So, and you're going to hear Anne say, don't look at it so much as the rage overkill, because yes, that is a component, but you have to look at how was it done, the multiple stabbings. That's what you need to look at. So, with that being said, let's move to Chronicles of Olivia and what is being said there. Got a lot of moving parts here. Okay. So I'm just going to rewind this a little bit so you can hear what they're talking about.
You guys found this out from family members that were in the area, and you guys didn't get notified. You actually reached out to them, and you guys still didn't get notified.
He wound up calling them twice.
And I get it. Their protocols are all about, like, maybe they'll commit suicide or something, but they have to be updated because social media moves so fast, so quick. That's why we are using social media. I'm not using the most common channels.
We called Karen, and we asked Karen if she had heard anything, and she goes, yes, I was told that I need to get down here, but there was an accident.
Was good. We
thought maybe Maddie was the unconscious person, and we had already been told by several people, like 100% Kaylee was dead. And we were like, 100, and they're bawling, and they're like,
Maddie was just unconscious.
And then we're like, but Karen got a call saying to come down there. We haven't got a call.
That was a good sign.
So we're like, oh.
And I kept giving them hope. I kept saying, if it happened last night, you guys would know by now. I kept giving them hope. I said, they just released an article that the roommates are being questioned.
Okay, so right there. Karen got called down to MPD to be questioned. In my opinion, it's because Maddie was the target. She is being questioned because they want to know why Maddie was targeted. Does Maddie have enemies? Was there an argument she had? Was there some discourse going on that she's aware of that was happening on campus at that house? What do they know? Because Maddie is the target. Kaylee was not the target because the Goncalves didn't go down, which always interests me, that I was surprised that the way Steve is, that he didn't go right down there to see what was going on. It was because he was respecting MPD and staying home and waiting to follow suit, to know what to do. He was waiting for someone to come and talk to him or call him so he would know what to do in order to help. But they never did that. But they did with Karen because Maddie was a target, in my opinion. They wanted to know why Maddie was targeted in this attack. They never asked Steve, and to come to find out throughout that interview with Olivia, they never really interviewed them at all. Which has me thinking this with what this former FBI agent has said. And he reminds me of one of the good ones, like with Mary Ellen, our girlfriend who had that great information before. So here he says this, and then we'll go back to the paper.
No, I'm not involved in the case, so I don't really have any inside information. But what you have to keep in mind, especially if there are defensive wounds or a lot of stabbing wounds, which there appear to be here, from an investigative point of view, that's very important because you have the likelihood of the offender's blood being at the scene.
Thank you for watching. Go to News Nation now.
All right. Defensive wounds, which is good. It's a good indicator that their blood will be at the scene because of the defensive wounds, which we do know that prosecution has 3 unidentified male DNA in their possession. And Ann Taylor has been waiting for those results with the last hearing, or one of the last hearings. And Bill Thompson felt it wasn't necessary to bring it. It wasn't relevant, which is bullshit. Bullshit. So, with that being said, here in this paper, in this research paper, we'll go over these 2 pages real quick. Expressive covert. Violence is evidenced by the presence of several violent acts which involves a serious physical assault on the victim. At the same time, the covert nature of the sexual violence is evidenced by the presence of only 3 out of the possible 11 sexual acts, which involve undressing the victim and other sexual acts. The combination of these actions reflects a subordinate theme that can best be described as expressive covert. However, as with the instrumental overt region, the actions are not randomly distributed. Rather, they appear to form 2 subthemes relating to overkill and a controlled killing. Overkill is expressively violent overkill, which is what they're going to bring up the FBI. But Anne says that is definitely a component, but it's not the leading component. Expressive violence involved the use of sharp instruments or weapons, which is what she says, to inflict extreme injuries beyond that necessary to cause death. In some cases, weapons were obtained from the scene, suggesting the violence was impulsive. In others, weapons were brought to the scene, suggesting the violence was premeditated. The sexual aspect is covert and involves other sexual acts that would constitute indecent assault, indicating no desire for a penetrative sexual encounter. Controlled. Expressively violent, all but controlled killing. Its expressive violence is involved by using blunt instruments, head injuries, and other injuries. The sexual aspect is covert and limited to undressing the victim, again indicating no desire for a penetrative sexual encounter. Victims were incapacitated and offenders took precautions to protect their identity, and after the killing, the victim's body was moved from the crime scene and left concealed, albeit naked, which I've mentioned in the affidavit, the PCA. Very little information is involved, which could be used to help with the investigation, but I find that hard to believe at this point, unfortunately. These actions indicate these killings were approached and accomplished in a careful, controlled, and well-ordered manner, which is what they're saying, as steps were taken to aid the completion of the crime and to reduce the chance of apprehension afterwards. Research suggests only a minority of homicides are sexual, given that only a proportion of such killings involve strangers. Stranger sexual homicides are very rare indeed. A key question is how we can understand such crimes, the offender actions within them, and the psychological factors which underpin them. When faced with a rare or novel phenomenon, social scientists, like their natural scientist colleagues, utilize classification. Within the social sciences, classification seeks to identify homogeneous subgroups among a heterogeneous sample and can be driven by pragmatism, theory, clinical opinion, or statistical analysis. Here, statistical analysis was employed to explore correlation structure of a set of crime scene actions exhibited by a sample of stranger sexual killers. The results suggest meaningful behavioral differences exist within stranger sexual homicide, from which hypotheses about the interpersonal dynamics of this crime can be formulated. So this is why I chose this research paper, because of they're saying it's Brian Koberger, but it's very rare. But it could be an anomaly, a phenomenon. But as he was saying about the defensive wounds, here it talks about this moving forward, the physical violence. This study suggests Physical violence within stranger sexual homicide is not a statistic, uniform entity, but a dynamic and diverse one. In some cases, physical violence was instrumental, involving manual or ligature asphyxiation, and occurred in the context of an overt sexual violence. Here, the hypothesis would be that this close-up and personal method of killing may have served a functional purpose, such as silencing a potential accuser, or satisfied the deviant desires of a sexually aroused offender who fled the scene once their needs were met. In other cases, physical violence was expressive, involving the use of weapons to inflict serious and at times extreme injuries beyond that necessary to cause death, and occurred in the context of covert sexual violence. While some expressive killings were indicative of an overkill or frenzied attack, which is what the FBI like to say, or like to use, others appeared more controlled, with the offender acting in a careful and well-mannered, well-ordered manner, perhaps indicating previous criminality and forensic awareness. One hypothesis would be that such actions are those of an emotionally aroused offender, discharging feelings of anger or hatred and intent on hurting their victim rather than simply hitting them. The result killings, therefore, may have satisfied offenders' needs beyond wanting to silence a potential accuser, such as anger, misogyny. Alternatively, the presence of a gratuitous violence may indicate the satisfaction of a sadistic sexual desire. Finally, in some cases, violence was premeditated, and the hypothesis would be that it was the result of a rational choice by an offender to target a specific victim type. In other cases, violence was unpremeditated, and the hypothesis would be that it arose in the context of an encounter with a victim of opportunity, encountered during the offender's routine activities. So there, when I was saying how I believe Maddie was the target because Karen was brought down to the police station to be questioned, to try to get information, to try to understand why Maddie was the target. And then Kaylee was in the bed with Maddie. And Steve said in 48 hours that her wounds were different because in December 4th, he says the wounds don't match, the deaths don't match. He comes out later in the 48 hours, which we don't know when that was recorded, that she was in the bed, she was stuck between the bed and the corner of the wall, which sounds very much like the Jack the Ripper that I went through in the FBI. And I feel Steve is working with the law enforcement as best as he can, considering how vocal he's been. And he says, I'm sorry, but I also feel like they're using him as well. They're almost re-victimizing him and using him as a way for this, as a narrative. And I hate to say it like that, but that's what I'm seeing. They're gaslighting him. If you saw in the last video how much they're gaslighting him and the family, and then they're using them as well. They're doing both. And I feel like Steve is doing the best that he can as being a grieving father. So Maddie was the target, and Kaylee, it was an opportunistic moment for the killer. Or I want to say that they knew that she was there because she was there Friday from Dylan, bringing her down back into town, asking her to be her date for the Betty Ball. And Kaylee was rationalizing it to be like, all right, well, I want to show Maddie my new car anyways, my new Range Rover, so I will go. So she was there Friday, and now here we are Saturday. And Saturday night, she's at the Corner Club. She's at the Grub Truck with Maddie. It's a small town. People talk. So they knew she was there at the house. Did they know that she would be in the bedroom with them? It's a possibility. It's a possibility it was opportunistic as well, that they were going to get Maddie and that they knew that she would be in bed with her and went with that as well. Not just to silence and hush her because of the defensive wounds, but because it was an opportunity. He saw her there, and some underlying cause, like they say here. One hypothesis would be that such actions are those of an emotionally aroused offender, discharging feelings of anger or hatred and intent on hurting their victim rather than simply hitting them. The resulting killings, therefore, may have satisfied offenders' needs beyond wanting to silence or potential accusers, such as anger or misogyny. Alternatively, the presence of gratuitous violence may indicate the satisfaction of a sadistic sexual desire. The violence was premeditated, and the hypothesis would be that it was the result of a rational choice by an offender to target a specific victim type. So that's what I'm going with the unpremeditated. It was a victim of opportunity, but we're keeping our options open. But those different scenarios can definitely work with what was going on with Kaylee and Maddie, while Maddie is the target. And that's why with these defensive wounds to silence a potential accuser or satisfy the deviant desires, that's why I think Ethan was the other target, because Xana had the defensive wounds. But they had to have known that Ethan was going to be there with Xana. They had to have known, just like they had to have known that Kaylee was going to be there with Maddie in the same room, because she wasn't living there anymore. She had moved out. So her bedroom is not going to be her bedroom of what it was before. Did she even have a bedroom there? Probably not. She moved out. Per the family. We don't know the time frame, but I'm going to say, I think they said weeks. It was a while. So she had not been there. So now all four of them are back together at this one moment of time. It was opportunistic and it was planned. In my personal opinion. And I'm not a professional. No, I'm not. But I'm being objective. I'm using former research and what law enforcement has given us, or try to hide or try to change, so on and so forth. So we're trying to use the best of our abilities. What the heck went on? So, with that being said, let's go to December 7th. Because this was December 5th. And go to here.
Investigation. Why is this such a complicated case? Why is the police not even communicating with the families? Nothing in this situation makes sense. And Jeanette, try to make sense of it for us.
Well, first off, Jesse, the police are communicating with the family members. We've heard from at least two of the family members, Maddie's family, through other published reports, and through Kaylee Gonsalves's family, that police are in touch with them daily. So we haven't really...
No, they're not. Because we learned on December 5th when they were on Fox News with Chrissy talking about the boogeyman. And the last time they spoke with them, that was a Sunday, the 4th. The last time they spoke with them was Thursday. And they only spoke to them more than likely just to get information and for them to sign a form to get mail. So it was opportunistic for them to talk to them. But every time that the Gonsalves has talked, it's because they don't hear from Ali. They're not hearing from anyone. So they're trying to keep the investigation going. Their rationale is from a place of getting answers, not to be a thorn.
Really gotten any more information about that, but I know I read something from Maddie's stepfather last night saying that the police contact them daily. Steve Gonsalves had said over the weekend in an interview that the police had last talked to them on Thursday of last week, and they were interviewed on Saturday. The police here are going to be apparently going over to the house on King Road today to get personal belongings of the family of the victims to return to their family members. So
I just wanted to bring that up because here we go. Everyone is just like covering for each other. Covering.
former law enforcement and an attorney. We talked about this earlier, how the family of Kaylee Gonsalves has indicated they might want to hire a lawyer. They might want to hire a lawyer to ultimately get more information from the police department. And there's a series of forms that they need to fill out. They don't know how to do it. That's why they would hire a lawyer. We know they've already hired a private investigator. Hiring a lawyer, is that going to complicate the investigation? Would it compromise it in any way? What would this lawyer exactly do? Can you walk us through it?
Yeah, well, the first thing, as you pointed out, is the lawyer will help them navigate the processes that are available to them as families of victims. There are a lot of victim witness statutes in certain states that help the families and witnesses and victims kind of navigate the process of how we get compensation or how we get information. And so those things can be kind of, onerous sometimes. And so an attorney who specializes hopefully in that area can help them navigate the paperwork that they fill out and the processes of what they can get and how they go about getting it. Hiring a private detective, I'm not a big fan of. They sometimes start parallel investigations. They talk to other witnesses that you've already talked to, and that can kind of complicate and interfere with the investigation. I was never a fan of that. When I was working on the inside as an investigator, me and the prosecutors would be working towards things, and when someone else is out there talking to witnesses that we've already talked to, or that was problematic to me.
Anjanette, over to you.
Because guess what? People have different perspectives and may have questions to ask that possibly prosecution and their investigators have not thought of because they're coming from a specific point of view. And if you're asking for help, for tips, then this is what happens. If you want leads, here you go. A different frame of mind, a different perspective. They're trying to help. They're trying to figure out what the hell's going on, especially when the way that it was brought to our attention was not honest and forthcoming, which other FBI agents have said as well. A lot of them have said they have not been fans of how they've handled this case.
First answer to this is you don't know, because we all don't know. How many viable suspects are there? I want to focus on the second part of this question from Ghost of Valor. I'd suspect male or more than one person. Do you think 4 victims, 2 different floors, does this look like this was more than one assailant?
Well, the first part is male. I do agree that it's probably a male because it probably required some level of physicality that, required a lot of strength and violence of action. And so I do believe it was a male. I mean, again, of course, we all could be wrong. This is all speculation. But I believe myself that it's a male, and I believe it's one person because of the fact that they were able to move through the house more quietly and get to so many victims. When you double the amount of people from 1 to 2, you double the amount of noise you make. Now, of course, it's easier to...
Which apparently he didn't do a very good job with that because he was heard.
Subdue people when you have 2 people. But this was a violent attack that took place very quickly, and I think it could have been carried out by one person, yes.
All right. Please, everybody, keep your questions coming in. This is the time to ask them. If you have questions, if you have issues about what is happening in the Idaho investigation, we will do our best to answer them.
Okay, so they're trying to say, keep it going, that the narrative is one person went in and stealthily went through quickly and quietly, even though Dylan heard things going on, open doors, closing doors, locking doors, but not calling when this had happened. So now we'll get into some of the 4chan posts that I found. So here we go. I found it interesting that I'm not a fan of 4chan, obviously, because how biased it is. And it's usually done by people who have a specific agenda in mind of who they are. Do I blame them? No, but sometimes yes. Once you get to a certain point, you have to make your own decisions in life and kind of question how you were raised, so to speak. But I find it interesting how some of them talk about night vision goggles, because how dark it is there. And it's always been dark. In the videos before, we show how dark it is. There's no street lights. There's no street lamps. There's no really any lights of the house to make it safe. That you need lights, even motion detectors, for safety and security. And there was none of that. We did see some like Christmas lights, but that's not really going to protect at all. So even here on 4chan, when they brought up night vision goggles, people were getting people were mentioning, quiet about that. Shut the fuck up about the night vision goggles. Right here, the killer didn't fucking need any night vision goggles. It was pretty clear night, and you can see some of the Instagram posts that the house was full of Christmas lights and shit. And even on the off chance night vision goggles were used as the killer walked around the house, LARPing like some sort of Silence of the Lambs type shit, what fucking difference does it make? Why would it matter? Well, it matters a lot. And that tells me that people may be onto something. And that's what I want to bring up with the military. They're finding there's a lot of military influence with gangs, military. There's military influence with the ROTC. You have the Air Force, Army, Navy. And we'll stick to that here. Right here. Aren't they currently looking into the University of Idaho's ROTC program? Don't they get issued M9 bayonets? Straight up military recruiting through the frats. The guys at Pi Kappa Phi seem to wear necklaces. The other frats don't. They look less wealthy, more mixed race. Rush week is supposed to be soon, like this week or next, I think. Recruitment coming. And this was back in December. With the goggles was back November 21st. And this is November 21st as well. According to the article, the police now believe that the knife was stolen from the ROTC collection, but they don't say how or why. It could have been stolen directly, or maybe it was kept when it was supposed to be returned after use, or maybe somebody who was supposed to have it lost control of it when somebody else stole or borrowed it from them. Now, Jeff brings up something like this with the phone later on. But maybe the police are wrong. They said they ran out of places to check for K-bars in stores. That's bullshit. Every single knife shop, gun shop, swap meet, pawn shop, tackle shop, martial arts stores sell them, either already having them in stock or can order them for you, and you can order them from Amazon or the company's website or any online gun store, bait shop supporting. The cops are literally retarded. I mean, even these people understand how they are not being forthcoming through this investigation. And it's funny, on the long crime, December 7th, with the Amazon. So I was looking around and kind of just putting this all together, preparing for this. And I came across, because of the military aspect of it, and Brett and Kyle, I believe his name is, are in the military, and there's some military influence, and I've learned through other people that I know who are in the military or who were in the military have said that they're in 82nd Airborne. So if they were over there during Afghanistan, which I believe they were, there's a time frame, if they're over there at that time, of a certain particular time, that those soldiers were used to protect poppy fields, and they were used to protect drug lords' crops. So, and Jeff Woods, the former FBI, talks about his gang experience, and that was brought up. So there is a intersectionality of gangs being in the military, either they were already in a gang and went into the military to learn skills and to bring things to their gangs, like the goggles, and also certain weapons were used that they knew that would penetrate bulletproof vests, and we'll get into that through a paper. And like they said in that 4chan, that some of the frats are being recruited through the military, and there is more gangs in rural areas than urban areas from what I've learned in the papers, so we'll go into that. But if I was just looking up the Payne brothers and I just Googled Payne brothers, Idaho, the first thing that comes up is Payne brothers custom knives, the Idaho clip point. Now, I'm aware that Brett is an avid hunter, and that is a demographic of Idaho. They do hunt. So seeing people with hunting knives, and we've seen a lot of knives throughout their posts of these four, mostly with Dylan, and that could just be a demographic that goes on, but it also could be hence gang or military influence having those weapons around them, which will be also is brought up in a paper that I'll bring up. So here, Payne Brothers Custom Knives, the Idaho Clip Point, Hunting Knife Kit, Knife Making Supplies. And just recently, how not too long ago, prosecution came out pretty much saying how they're waiting for their information from Amazon saying who clicked on this, like trying to get a K-bar, which I feel is more like almost like thought police. Like, if I just clicked on here, am I going to get watched now? Even if I don't put it in my ad, I don't know if you have to add into your cart or not. But just looking at an item on Amazon, they can use it as a way to do a probable cause that you committed a mass murder. That is terrifying and unconstitutional. And they're just bringing it out there. That's what they're doing. That is insane to me. So, I don't know if it's the same brothers of Idaho. I don't know how many sets of Payne brothers are in Idaho, but it's a little alarming. So, let's go into, without further ado, into the next phase, which is Mindhunter. And we'll get into now where I got my focal point of starting this channel. And we'll go through this, mostly hearing from Jeff, but as well as Ann and Gary. And I will bring in other elements as well as I've learned through those papers. So, let's get ourselves introduced to Jeff.
Looking for a killer. He is the co-author of The New Evil, Understanding the Emergence of Modern Violent Crime. And the handsome man in the bottom corner with a clean-cut haircut is Jeff Wood, retired FBI out of Boston. He gets the shortest bio because I just found out that he was joining us. Welcome to one and all. Thank you, guys and women.
I'll just jump in and mention that I'm no longer...
And I find it interesting that Jeff just jumped in, just like the four unidentified males go into 1122 King Road. And we're walking around in there with no police escort at night on December 9th. December 8th is when they came out with a stock photo of the occupants that they wanted to talk to about that night. And Anne brings this up as well. We all heard that. There was occupants in the car.
To 2013 Hyundai Elantra, which investigators say they believe the occupants of this vehicle may have critical information to share regarding this case. First to the legend, Anne. How big a deal is this that police are finally putting out a possible suspect vehicle?
Well, a car is certainly a good piece of evidence.
Okay. So now we're going to get into the Navy SEAL talking about rage.
We are the world capital of mass murders, unfortunately. And to you, the legend of the panel, I spoke to a Navy SEAL who's also a former FBI special agent, and he said he didn't think it was a rage killing. And I'm going to get into a little bit more of what his take was a little deeper into the show. He does not think it's a rage killing. Do you, and how are you profiling this killer from the information that you've gathered thus far?
Well, only have the information, of course, has been released to the public. And the important thing is, if he's thinking rage in terms of what would also be considered overkill, that far more injury to each victim than was necessary to kill the victim. If that's a definition, that would be important to know, because we don't know. We still have not seen autopsy reports which will have the number of stab wounds, et cetera, and more importantly, what part of the body. Is this more contained to the face and the neck and the chest, or is it other parts? So again, once that information comes out, we'll have a better lead on. But the issue of rage, just meaning over aggression to the bodies of these 4 young students, it still doesn't say motive. From that standpoint, that a knife was used, that's important. A knife, how many types of cases are knives used? I know in our study, we did have one mass murder, and that was Richard Speck out of Chicago back in the 60s, I think. And so he was one of our 36. And so I've been trying to look at that to see if there's any differences, any similarities, that kind of thing. But he used a variety of ways of killing the young students. But in this case, in your Idaho case, again, I'd like to wait a little bit to see how much injury to the victim and what location of the injury.
I'm going to get to Jeff.
Okay. So with that being said, she is talking about this. Impersonal. This sub-theme contains 7 actions which indicate an instrumentally violent but impersonal sexual assault. Instrumental violence involved manual or ligature asphyxiation, and although overt, the sexual aspect differs from the rape sub-theme, as here it appears to be of an impersonal nature. This is evidenced by the fact that the victims had their clothing ripped or torn or were sexually assaulted. Okay? And then the expressive covert. The expressive nature of the violence is evidenced by the presence of several violent acts, which involves a serious physical assault on the victim. At the same time, the covert nature of the sexual violence is evidenced by the presence of only 3 out of the possible 11 sexual acts, which involve, okay, here we go. We're kind of just going over things. The combination of these actions reflects a subordinate theme that can best be described as expressive covert. However, as with the instrumental overt region, the actions are not randomly distributed. Rather, they appear to form 2 sub-themes related to overkill and a controlled killing. So, the use overkill, which is what he was saying, is it overkill? It's not rage. He was saying it's not rage or overkill, but she's saying that it involves, we want to know what type of instrument. Was it a knife? Sharp instruments or other weapons to inflict extreme injuries beyond that necessary to cause death. In some cases, weapons were obtained from the scene, suggesting the violence was impulsive. In others, weapons were brought to the scene, suggesting the violence was premeditated. And then controlled means expressly violent, albeit controlled killing. That involved blunt instruments, head injuries, and other injuries. So, is it overkill, meaning expressive violently by the use of sharp instruments or other weapons, or was it controlled and expressly violent by using blunt instruments, having head injuries or other injuries? And then this is coming with the covert of undressing the victim, so on and so forth, which we don't know that information at all. Okay? Now, and the need to know what type of, like, where the body parts. So, is this the one? Current slide. So here, controlled and personal expressive instrumental, bludgeon weapon, head injury. So we need to know what she was saying. It's not so much about the amount, the overkill, yes, that is an aspect, but you want to know what type of instrument, which will tell you, because it's more personal in nature. And here, with the overkill is what they said, it's not that, but there is stabbing, and there is a weapon at the scene. But if it's controlled, was there a bludgeon weapon? Was there a head injury? Impersonal, the ligature, clothing ripped. So with that being said, it's more about the weapon. Stabbed, weapon brought, other weapon, sharp instruments. Because, as she was saying, actions can co-occur. Instrumental violence is accompanied by overt sexual violence. Expressive violence is accompanied by covert sexual violence. So you need two different factors to understand the complexity of what is going on with this case. Next, all right, here we go.
About the crime scene in a moment, but Anne, Steve Gonzalez, Kaylee's father, has been speaking quite a bit to the media. One of the things that he said was that the injuries, and I don't have the exact verbiage in front of me, that the injuries to his daughter, Kaylee, were more severe, more pronounced than to Maddie. Are you reading anything into that? When I spoke to this Navy SEAL, he said it could be that she was a target. It could be that they got to Maddie after the person got to Maddie afterwards and could have just been fatigued. This, without getting too macabre, this Navy SEAL was saying it is difficult to kill a person. It takes a lot of energy, especially with a knife. But what do you make about the fact that the father came out and said that the injuries to his daughter were worse?
Well, it would give you some, what the meaning of that would obviously be in the motive of the offender. If there was more, again, I want to know location to see where it is, what number she was in terms of being of the four. I absolutely agree with the Navy SEAL that it takes a lot of strength to go to kill four young people who, some of them obviously could have woken up and resisted. We don't know that. But I think the other important thing is it was dark. Unless he turns lights on, it was dark. So he's doing this. Does he really know who is who, if you will? That would be important. And why he leaves the first two and goes to the next floor, the third floor, and kills the others. Something, and that's where his daughter was. I think that is important. So that if he, there's been a lot in the media about targeting, and could it have been her that he was targeting? And so again, I think that's important information, and I would just keep that again with the understanding that the context that it's in. I just find a lot of the lights being off, and who is he stabbing, and how much does he even have? I think there's some talk that they can wear these head lights in the dark that would shine on person, but that had to have been a very well planned type of crime.
Just to follow up on location, you're meaning the location of the stab wounds, and
yes.
So let's say it was the abdomen as opposed to the neck. What does that location tell you as someone that reads into the minds of these killers?
Well, I'm looking at more if they're at the neck. and the chest. That is usually where you would see stab wounds. To the abdomen, that could just be that he's just not visualizing well where he's stabbing. That's going to be a less of a lethal weapon. You have fewer arteries in that area unless you get down to the thighs. So I think that, if there was so much blood from what
they're saying. So I like she brought that up because that's the whole Jack and the Ripper where they said that they were stabbing the abdomen. He had no anatomical understanding of what was going on. But if it's a targeted attack and it was controlled, which she is saying, it was well thought out and planned out, they're going to purposely go towards the neck and the chest where the arteries are. So that's important. And there's going to be blood splatter because those are arteries. Then she mentioned about going at night and how dark it is. Did they wear headlights on their head? Like when you go out hunting or you go cave, whatever, clumping or whatever it is called, or plunking. But that brings me up to the night vision goggles, which I brought up in the 4chan. But then I also want to look into this. And some of these I'm going to read with highlights, and I will just go ahead and read them and drop the video, and then you can listen to them at your leisure. But I want to go through all of them personally at one point, but not at this time. So I will do that in the future, within the week. And this is right here. Gangs in the military. All right. So this is the Yale Law Journal, Gangs in the Military. Gang activity in the U.S. military is increasing. Gang members undermine good order and discipline in the armed services and pose a serious threat to military and civilian communities. Congress recently responded to this threat by directing the Secretary of Defense to promulgate regulations forbidding the active participation of service personnel in criminal street gangs. This note reviews the threat posed by military gangs and analyzes existing military policies addressing gang affiliation. This note concludes with recommendations for the military to consider when it drafts the new regulations demanded by Congress. So this is the J.D. Yale Law School of 2008, Princeton University 2005. Many thanks to Professor yada yada. Okay, so I have highlighted some of this already. So military-trained gang members pose an even greater threat to civilian communities. While on active duty, they may use their security privileges and military equipment to further gang activities. After discharge, they can pass their training on to other gang members and use their service connections to network between civilian and military gangs. The FBI of Investigation fears that access to weapons and combat training could ultimately result in more organized, sophisticated, and deadly gangs, as well as an increase in deadly assaults on law enforcement officers. Numerous media services and local agencies have echoed these concerns. Despite the widespread recognition that gang members pose a serious risk to military and civilian communities, the armed forces have had little success in reducing the number of serving gang members or preventing gang-related crime. This failure is partly attributed to difficulties in the recruitment process. Okay. And there is a specific area here, implications of gang activity in the military. The presence of gang members in the armed forces poses worrisome problems. In the military, gang members threaten unit order and compromise faith-based security. A shocking example of this is found in the facts of United States versus Quintanilla, in which a Marine sergeant and self-proclaimed gang member shot his commanding officer and executive officer, both lieutenant colonels, and threatened to continue killing officers until his fellow gang members were released from confinement. Other examples of destabilizing gang influences involve narcotics, crimes, robberies, and aggravated assaults. Often, these incidents trigger other acts of disobedience or retaliation. Over the years in which the Army has recorded gang activity, the 5 bases initially reporting What? So when I get into a flow? Okay, here we go. High rates of gang activity have witnessed an increase in those rates despite efforts to address the situation. The presence of gangs in the armed services also threatens to undermine the professionalism of the military and bring discredit upon the nation's forces. The potency of this threat to the public perception of armed force services is evidenced by the number of critical news reports published after reported incidents of military gang activity. In each incident, gang members compromise the otherwise proud traditions of our country's armed forces. Gang activity in military has a negative impact on civilian communities as well. Law enforcement officials are concerned about gang-affiliated soldiers transferring their required training and weapons back to communities to facilitate the commission of crimes. When such transfers of knowledge and supplies have occurred, communities have suffered and law enforcement officials have fared poorly. In particular, civilian gangs with military ties have proven extremely dangerous to confront and track. These issues become even more problematic as gangs active in the military have been more sophisticated and mobile. And here was I was talking about. The Marine had served in Iraq and chose his weapon because he knew its rounds would pierce body armor. Okay. Disciples murder the friends of a local nightclub owner who expelled their leader for unruly behavior. At Fort Lewis, Washington, an Army specialist and several accomplices stole night vision goggles to sell to a gang in California. And in Columbia, South Carolina, 4 Marines were caught recruiting local teenagers into the Crips. So there you go. Night vision goggles at Fort Lewis, Washington. An Army specialist and several accomplices stole night vision goggles. So it can happen. It's a possibility that night vision goggles were used that night. Crazy as that sounds, crazy as it may be, I find that unbelievable and very scary. Moving forward. And I will read that all and drop it off as well as a video. So moving forward. Next. Got through that. All right, so here we're going to hear Jeff talk more about his 20 years of FBI experience. Is it shortly after?
They say it's got to be probably more to the neck and the chest, which is very well planned. That to me says he's very well planned.
So, Jeff.
Okay, quickly before I just remembered, there was something else that she brought up that I wanted to look into, which was Richard Speck right here. Richard Speck, he was an American mass murderer who killed 8 student nurses in their South Deering, Chicago residence via stabbing, strangling, slashing their throats, or a combination of the 3 on the night of July 13th to the 14th in 1966. One victim was also raped prior to her murder. A 9th potential victim, student nurse Carranza Amoruro, survived by hiding beneath a bed. He was convicted of all 8 murders on April 15th, 1967, and he was sentenced to death. His sentence was reduced to 400 to 1,200 years in 1972. So with him, though, it was all night. It didn't happen within minutes, like 19, 20 minutes. It was hours, and there are videos out there. I think there's one on Amazon right now that's on Amazon Prime. It kind of goes through that, and you can definitely read it on your leisure. But with him, it was one person. It was all 8 of those student nurses, but it was throughout the night. Okay.
NBC News had an interesting report. They spoke to some former FBI agents, such as yourself, and basically the gist of this story is one of these FBI agents says, look, it's going to take a long time. This is not like the TV show. It's not like CSI. And this agent went on to say, former agent went on to say, it's complicated by the chaotic nature of the murders, the layout of the rented house where the victims were found, the likelihood that many students hung out or partied there, collecting and processing hundreds of DNA samples, and then looking for a potential suspect or suspect's genetic profile could take weeks or months. Do you agree with that? And how difficult is it to process this crime scene?
I do agree with that. I was not a homicide investigator, but I spent my 20 years in the FBI conducting investigations targeting violent gang members. So I helped out in many instances after the fact where murder took place and helped out in different ways to help solve murders. But I do know that when you have a situation in this case where, you've got an apartment building, you're going to have a party, you're going to have friends over, so you're going to have people in and out of that place. So you're going to have fingerprints left there, DNA left there. So in this situation, when the murder takes place and you're going through that, you're collecting a whole lot of DNA, and now you're going to have to try and get comparisons to that DNA to develop a suspect. So it can take a long time. There's a lot of different techniques that the law enforcement can use. Now that you've got the state police helping out the town's police department, you've got the FBI, you have other federal agencies. So there's a lot of different techniques that can be brought into bear to help try and narrow down suspects, but it's still a painfully long process. And one thing that I've seen in my career, juries and the public look at our TV shows, look at our movies, and you solve a crime in an hour, you solve a crime in 2 hours in the movie. And they expect law enforcement to be able to solve these horrendous crimes that quickly and have it wrapped up nice and neat in a bow. And it doesn't even and there's a misconception.
All right, and that's where I asked the poll. Thank you for all who went ahead and did it. Do you believe Ellie has the capabilities, homicides, mass murders, to wrap it up quickly in a tight bow like they do on CSI or any other forensic television show? 7 votes, and 100% said no. So I don't want to believe that's public perception. Yes, you're going to have people who think that. Yes. Are they the outliers? I would like to think so. I like to think people are smarter than they're trying to say that we are. And that's exactly what Ellie did with this case. They wrapped it up in a tight little bow. It's Brian Koberger. He's an incel. He's been stalking them. He's a PhD student, so he has forensic knowledge. He went away in his getaway car that he drove around. He's close to them. He's been stalking. I mean, DNA on the sheath. What else? At his house, they found garbage, the lineage. I mean, it's all wrapped up in a tight little bow, and they sent it off. And he's got the car. That's not really his car, same year, but they got the car. So that is all bullshit right there. So thank you for doing that poll. I think it was 7 people. Appreciate it. And I like to do that further on with my other videos as well. I'll put out a poll, see what you say, bring it into the video. So then, what does he have to say after this?
Perception sometimes of what we can gather from a crime.
So then here is an important aspect.
You're going to see that this is somebody that people found peculiar at baseline. A little too cold, a little too regimented, a little bit too interested in things like, blades and weaponry and hunting and things like that, and who coolly, in a detached way, planned to express rage. And that is very different than a person experiences rage impulsively. That's what it feels like to me. And there are mass murders like that, and they are especially cruel. And the only final thing I'll say about that kind of mass murder is that when they do it, usually there is a target, and everyone else is like basically collateral damage. So that there's that one individual who is honed in on as the object of fixation, and anyone else who has to take the blade is just because of their proximity or because they sort of mentally remind the person too much of that individual, the person they're dating, the people they...
And we went with that over in the stranger sexual homicide.
Love, the whatever. It's just to kind of wipe them out. And, you really, when this is where I think there's that very modern flavor to this kind of case, is I think you really want to understand that this in many ways is probably an expression of envy. Someone who is angry that other people are more accepted and more loved, more desirable, and more relaxed and comfortable socially. So that's the kind of person who would say, if I can't have it, why should you?
And there are...
Which is what I've been saying personally, as well as other people saying. They had a light, people loved them, they had a lot of friends, they were comfortable with themselves. Ethan, Xana, Ethan was very athletic. He was brought upon in the fraternity pretty well, I want to say, from what it sounds like. Even though Xana, Maddie, and Kaylee were no longer in sororities, it looked as though that they were pretty... Well, Kaylee had a very huge following and on her social media, and everyone pretty much, not much has come out of how ugly they were as people, which I would think some of that would come out to light. Yes, there was some bullying, I guess, with Maddie and Hannah. That is one thing that people have been saying throughout. But other than that, not much about Ethan having a fight with a fraternity member. That has also been brought up. But to the point where you're killing them, that is someone who is, like he says, a peculiar individual that has some type of... some aspect of him that makes you feel like he is an odd duck. And I just wanted to bring in the picture here of... Let's see. I try to get organized. All right. Nope. Right here. Now, people on 4chan were talking about this particular fraternity, and they're looking more at what he is wearing on him. The K-bar knife or bayonet, whatever it is. He's dressed as a military person with that knife. Now, do we take that literally? Or do we take it as a costume? It's military. It's a military-issued knife. And yes, it is Idaho, and people do have guns. Or, excuse me, do have knives. They have guns too, but they do carry around knives. It's like a natural thing for them to do. So can you read into it? Possibly. Is it plausible? It is, but not just to say 100% this is the person because of this, but just to show that knives are carried around in Idaho. But how much is the knife carried around? How much does that person talk about the knife? How much is that person talking about hunting, so on and so forth? There's going to be an extremism about that. So I just wanted to bring that out. And that's what Gary is saying. It's to a point where it makes people feel uncomfortable of the way they talk about knives, hunting, so on and so forth. So now, let's move a little bit further. And we're going to hear Jeff talk about his gang experience.
And I wanted to
that answered your question. That was a long answer, but I hope that answered your question.
The thorough answer, as expected.
Could I add one thing, though?
Absolutely, please.
Yeah, Jeff, tell me what you think about that.
I completely agree with you on that level, but I would.
Gary.
Again, this is coming from my gang experience and coming from my last case being MS-13 and dealing with the brutality of the MS-13 gang members. The 18th Street gang members were, initially founded as an American gang, but is now morphed into that Central American gang. And they brought that Central American third world type mentality to their business of being gang members.
See how he says it was original and American, but now it's become more of a third world, South American, almost trying to separate it. Like, that's not us anymore. Now that is them. Okay, so you got to be careful with that, because how do you think that's just going to stop? So just listen to what he says, and even look at Gary and Ann. They're kind of like, okay, but listen.
And they use bladed weapons. So everything you said, I would say for a American, a Western, European, Canadian, absolutely speaks true.
But we eliminate them, Jeff. We took them out of the database. People who were committing mass murder in the context of crime, like gang activity, were eliminated. It was personal cause only.
But I'm just saying, for a law enforcement perspective, on a lower, it would not be my.
How can you separate the gang if in law enforcement? It needs to be all taken care of. And yes, it's no longer. Let's hear that again. They have taken them out of the FBI database. That is scary.
Canadian absolutely speaks true.
But we eliminate them, Jeff. We took them out of the database. People who were committing mass murder in the context of crime, like gang activity, were eliminated. It was personal cause only.
But I'm just saying, for a law enforcement perspective, on a lower, it would not be my priority.
All right, I can't listen to him. He's just full of shit. So let's look at the FBI. Because when he said that they're no longer in the database, so let me see if that is true or not. So you go ahead, the vault of the FBI, gangs, extremist groups, and he's talking about the MS-13 and the 18th Street gang. So here we have white supremacist groups, George Lester Jackson, the Ku Klux Klan, the Hells Angels, the 5 Percenters, Black Panther Party, National Gang Threat Assessment, which is, we're not going to get into that right now. Almighty Latin Kings, El Rukins, White Aryan Resistance, and then the previous 20, we got Black September, Aryan Nation, Mexican Mafia, Mafia Monograph, Bloods and Crips gangs, Clarence Smith, White Hat Groups, Waco Branch Davidian, Imperial Gangsters, Black Guerrilla, the Original Knights of the KKK, the American Nazi Party, Weather Underground, Aryan Brotherhood, Nostra Familia, Aryan Circle, George. So yes, there is no MS-13, and there are no 18th Street gang. So that is just the vault. This is in the vault. This is what they have now. They have stopped going on with that. Now they just look at for personal. That's why they're just looking at it as a serial murder, because they no longer are looking at mass murders that are done by gangs anymore. Don't you find that interesting? They stopped doing that for a reason. I'd be interested to know why. So that's what got me into looking at these particular papers. Right here. So we already went through a little bit of the gangs and military and how there is some intersectionality with that. So let's look at there's also military families and gangs in Washington state. And I have not highlighted this one, but I will definitely look into that. It's weapon carrying, physical fighting, and gang membership among youth in Washington state families, military families. But the one I want to look into is that's right. There we go. So this right here this is military trained gang members in the volunteer state in the United States revisiting the issue after 4 years. So this is International Journal of Criminal Justice Sciences, December 2018. And it's open access. And the interesting part about this is it's the official journal of the South Asian Society of Criminology and Victimology. And so it's the International Journal of Criminal Justice. Okay. So the two who wrote this is Carter Smith of the Middle Tennessee State University, United States of America, and Tao Chu, University of North Georgia, United States of America. So, the abstract is communities everywhere have experienced the negative effects of street gangs, domestic terrorists, and outlaw motorcycle gang members. When they have military training, the threat increases significantly. The purpose of the study was to address the presence of military-trained gang members, MTGMs, in civilian communities. The problem addressed was the growing presence of MTMGs in civilian communities. A survey of members of the Tennessee Gang Investigators Association was conducted in 2010 and 2014 to measure perceptions regarding the presence of MTMGMs. There was a statistically significant increase in the perceived presence of most MTMGM, I want to say that group, that musical group, factors, but no significant difference in the MTGM score from the 2010 and 2014 surveys. Further research should include an extended longitudinal examination of the effects of MTGMs on the community, including states in the United States with a different history of gang activity, to determine the perceptions regarding the presence of gang members currently in military service and with more analytical detail. This was blowing my mind. I had no idea. This is how much of a bubble I live in. I had no idea that any of this could be a possibility. Which is scary. Very scary. And when Gary was saying, I'm looking at the law enforcement with these papers that I'll go into further on a different time, or maybe throughout if I remember, there is such a disconnect between law enforcement and gangs within the military and how there needs to be no longer that, there needs to be a bridge of them being aware of this more of. Which brings me up with the FBI and serial killers with the symposium. It was the same exact thing. Law enforcement was kind of on their own when it comes to these types of serial killings. Now here we go. While he's saying with the gang members in the military, it sounds like the same exact thing is going on, which is dangerous for everyone, especially for police officers. I mean, how scary is that? If as a law enforcement agent, a law enforcement officer in small Idaho, Moscow, that maybe this was an aspect. What in the hell? Moving on. Introduction. United States Military Criminal Investigation Organizations, the MCIO, the Army Criminal Investigations Command, CID, Air Force Office of Special Investigations, AFOSI, and Naval Criminal Investigative Services, the NCIS, which, by the way, are ROTCs at the University of Idaho, have identified military personnel with gang membership or affiliation in every branch of the U.S. military. National Gang Intelligence Center, the NGIC 2013, while military laws prohibit active membership, street gangs, outlaw motorcycle gangs, OMGs, and domestic terrorist extremists, DTE groups all have members who have or are enlisted in the military. Gang members and associates may join the military to get away from the gang lifestyle, okay, and the criminal temptations associated with it, okay, that's a positive. They may also join to try to acquire military training and access to weapons and sensitive information. Military members deploy and serve all over the world. Now that is scary. And as I was saying here, military trained gang members pose a serious threat to law enforcement and to the public. They learn combat tactics in the military and then return to the civilian community to utilize those new skills against rival gangs or law enforcement. So they become sophisticated. So I did highlight some points. As I said, I'll read this and drop it off as a video. But right now we're just looking at the highlights. So domestic terrorist extremists in the military. The U.S. Code, I had something written real quick just to make sure that I follow through on my hard copy. Okay. The U.S. Code section 23315 defines domestic extremists as individuals in the U.S. who engage in activities known as domestic terrorism, including crimes that are dangerous to human life, intended to intimidate or coerce others, influence government by intimidation or coercion, or affect the conduct of government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. Domestic terrorism includes acts within the territory of the United States that are dangerous to human life, violate federal or state criminal laws, have no actual connection to international terrorists, and appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence domestic government policy through intimidation or coercion, or affect the conduct of our government by mass destruction. Okay, we already went through all that. Crimes relating to fraud and threats and hoaxes. Okay, domestic terrorism cases often involve firearms, arson, explosive offensive, crimes relating to fraud, threats, and hoaxes. The U.S. Department of Defense, Homeland Security, and Justice typically use the terms extremists and terrorists interchangeably, likely because they all use the U.S. Code definition. Because of the multiple and potential confusing uses of the terms terrorist and extremists, in addition to other qualifiers that may or may not be used consistently by all the U.S. government entities. Unless inappropriate based on definition or context, we will use the term domestic terrorist extremists, DTE, to identify such groups and their members. While street gang and OMG members clearly commit crimes as part of their group membership, DTE members are more likely to be political. The Department of Justice does not publish or maintain a list of DTE organizations, partly due to First Amendment concerns. Isn't that what he was just saying, Gary? The NGIC identified 3 major types of DTEs: black separatist extremists, sovereign citizen extremists, and white supremacist extremists. From 2012 to 2015, the U.S. Army CID conducted 22 DTE investigations involving drug-related offenses, murder, assault, communicating a threat, provoking speech or gestures, threats, and failure to obey. 4 investigations involved members of white supremacist groups, 2 involved militia groups, and 1 involved an anti-government group. There are 15 subjects identified, with 12 soldiers, all on active duty. Most TE-related subjects were 20 to 24-year-old white males, single, and junior enlisted. Okay. That's all I got there. For now. Junior enlisted. 20 to 24-year-old white males. And there was a New York Times article towards the beginning talking about white supremacy. I believe JLR went through that on one of his videos, and that was kind of towards the beginning of the investigation. So, just putting that out there. Possibility, maybe. Plausibility, possibly. But I'm just using this as an educational purpose. Moving on. So, here
is part of this as well. Idaho, Moscow, Idaho, much different than Boston or Miami, where I am. Everyone out there is a hunter. A lot of people are carrying knives. Maybe that's part of it. And to you, do you think this killer has killed before, if you had to guess?
Let me go back, sorry.
I think he has killed.
So, go back to what they were saying about the gang affiliation. We didn't finish that, so let me finish that. And that is this.
In Canadian, absolutely speaks true.
But we eliminate them, Jeff. We took them out of the database. People who were committing mass murder in the context of crime, like gang activity, were eliminated.
Oh,
it was
I
personal cause only.
But I'm just saying, for a law enforcement perspective,
yes,
on a lower, I mean, it would not be my priority. I would not say that this is my number one lead type thing, but I would never rule out some type of criminal aspect. Like you don't, I don't want to, this isn't to say that there was any criminal activity committed by the victims here, but we have to say maybe they knew a criminal, who knows? But if you had a criminal who was a gang member.
And same thing, I want to just put that out. Bringing this to light, I understand you want to be respectful of the victims, meaning Zaina, Ethan, Maddie, and Kaylee. Whatever they did and what they were affiliated with, they did not deserve what happened to them. They are younger, and I had no idea about this whole military involvement with street gangs, and that I've heard about the extremist groups like white supremacy. There was a big thing in Idaho with it when they were trying to stop a LGBTQ. Like I'm aware of those. But I didn't realize how interchangeable it was with ROTC and into the military being junior enlisted. Like I had no idea about that. So they're still innocent, no matter their involvement, even if it was with drug dealing or whichever they're in that home, does not mean they understand fully the comprehensiveness behind this is going on. And they are still a victim no matter what.
You wouldn't have necessarily that same mentality. It was just something I would keep down low on my lead board, or like here are possible things. And so in that case, 99% of the time I'm with you. But what if you had that 1% chance where this is someone who, with the MS-13 gang, they love their knives and machetes and hacking people to death constantly. So for me as an investigator, I won't rule out anything until my evidence is pointing somewhere. So I just wanted to add that too.
I think it's a really important and smart point, and I think the reason that blades and things might be used is because the crime scene is also a message to would-be, talkers and witnesses and things like that. But otherwise, you'd imagine a very expeditious killing, like just shooting people, because there was no reason to kill these people in this way. No. If it wasn't to either send a message or to express a fantasy or play out something emotionally. Agreed. And that's why you have to say killing in ways other than expeditiously with a gun have a special cruelty that has to have a driver. And that's where I think the gang thing is interesting. But if it were a gang thing, Jeff, you tell me, this is your area, wouldn't it be more to send a message? That
it actually would. It would be to send a message. I mean, MS-13 did it because they're showing everyone this is our territory, and this is how we let everyone know that we're instilling fear into that community. So
I wanted to bring this up because and here is the Alpha Gamma Rho. That was the picture of the one wearing the military garb with the knife. Okay, and that's where they're located at. And 1108, which is just right down here, is Queen Road. So I wanted to bring this up. Now, people mention how there are sneakers on the wires, and that's like a gang type, territorial type symbol that they're marking that territory as theirs. So I went ahead and looked at some of my old schools where I was getting into just learning how to edit and just kind of put my point of view out there with this. So I'm going to show that with this. Okay. All right. So there you go. You see the sneakers there. And there's their 1108 over there. There's the sneakers. And then as they turn up, you're going to see more down the street. All these right here. Boom, 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 boom. And you're going to even see them further up here as well. See right there. By the Queen Road Apartments. Here and there. Okay. Here, there, and here. Here's 112. There's that line. And then here are some more sneakers. Okay? So, after oops. Right here. I see him right here, the sneaker, but there were many more here. I don't see them. I don't even see the ones here up by 1122. They're gone. Okay. See? So here by 1112. Here. I'm not quite sure, but I want to say that as well. Let's rewind it back a little bit. Look at all those. Okay. Several of them. And I noticed that back in the day. The sneakers. Because that has always been the chirp of drug activity, gang activity. Back in the day, back in the 90s, that was kind of like a symbolism of a sorts. And look at all those here. Sneakers right there. So, here's another picture. This is looking over 1122. I see no sneakers. No sneakers. None. There's one right here, it looks like. And that's as far. But they're not there. Except for this one right here. But there was a bunch, as you noticed before. So just the one. And that's it. And there were many more. Maybe that one. I don't know if that really is though, but it could be. So I just thought that was interesting. So, moving on.
This was somehow related to a gang or some kind of criminal activity, it's definitely working by sending a message that we're instilling fear right now because here we are. And
all right, so let's go to what Anne is saying about the killer.
I think he has killed animals before. I have no doubt about it.
And the question is, do you think he's killed before?
Well, Idaho, Moscow, Idaho, much different than Boston or Miami, where I am. Everyone out there is a hunter. A lot of people are carrying knives. Maybe that's part of it. And to you, do you think this killer has killed before, if you had a guess?
I think he has killed animals before. I have no doubt about that. Whether he has killed a human, I don't think so. I did want to say a few words about the victim because my area is much more in the victim area. We don't have a lot of information, but the one tiny bit I could find is the agents would always profile from the risk level of the victim and the risk level of the offender. From the risk level of the victim, it would be very low if you just take the crime scene. They were in bed sleeping, whereas the risk level to the offender, it was not too high because it was night and the victims were sleeping, so he had a lot of control over them. However, two of the victims worked. I didn't get where they worked, but that would raise their kind of social status where other people knew them. So
I believe it was a Greek restaurant in town.
Okay, but at least.
And that's been brought up as well. But I just wanted to bring this up because she says he believes that they killed animals before. Not maybe a person, but animals. So I wanted to bring that up. Which I did in my one video, How Far Does That Web Go? 4 Greek houses near U of University of Idaho wake up to dead coyotes on doorsteps. And this is back in February 14th of 2017. Moscow police are investigating after someone left dead coyote carcasses on the doorsteps of several Greek houses near the University of Idaho campus. 3 sororities and 1 fraternity woke up Friday to find the dead animals on their porch. Moscow police are investigating and said this is actually the second time this has happened this year. On January 20th, a man left a dead animal on the porch of a sorority and was caught on camera. He admitted to police he had done it on a dare. In that case, the suspect did not face charges because the sorority did not want to press them. Could it be because it was a fraternity member? Said Captain Tyson Barrett of Moscow PD. In that case, the sorority just wanted the suspect to clean up the mess. In last week's incident, police said they do not have any suspects, though the man from the first incident is being questioned. Barrett said the second incident did not appear to have the same MO. In the second incident, it appeared someone threw the carcasses from a car from the alleyway behind the houses. Barrett said in the first incident, the suspect had taken the time to place it nicely at the door. It is a misdemeanor to leave a carcass near a house, highway, or stream in the state of Idaho. If the person is caught, they could face a fine up to $100. Any information? How about looking into them? How about let's look into the rationale of why they did that? Okay, and here is November 21st. 7 dead coyotes left on student property in Moscow, Idaho in 2 separate incidences. 3 sororities and 1 fraternity targeted. Animal blood on doorsteps and windows. So this is also talking about 2017, but they brought this up in November 21st. It doesn't say, and this is this year because of the murders that happened. So they went ahead and talked about it, and they do a little bit further. In 2 separate incidences in 2017, dead coyotes were left on the properties of sororities and fraternities in Moscow, Idaho. The animals had been shot and their bodies placed on the property. The first incident took place on January 20th, 2017, and a suspect was caught on camera. Police officers identified the suspect, and it was revealed to them that the incident was intended to be a joke. The second incident, officers say, didn't fit the MO of the first incident, and the previous suspect wasn't declared responsible. The animal dumps were found on Pi Kappa Phi, Pi Beta Phi, and Alpha Phi, properties between 1:22 a.m. and 4:22 a.m. Okay. As previously reported, Moscow Police Captain Tyson Barrett said, we don't have enough information as to who actually committed it, so we don't know if it's a continuation of that prank or someone else doing something. Pi Kappa Phi President Ethan Ennis says the coyote killings were gruesome, the coyote's body was mangled, and he says the sorority across the street got it even worse. Ennis said at Pi Beta Phi there was more blood on the doorstep, some even smeared on the window. Police said it appears that coyotes were shot, which is not illegal in Idaho. On the back porch of the home where the 4 University of Idaho students were murdered, what looks to be animal fur or some kind of cloth had been seen in what looks to be a dog bed. Okay? It is unclear what it is actually shown in these photographs, or if the incidents involving the dead coyotes have any connection to the recent murder of 4 students in Moscow, Idaho. See, this is 2 separate photos, because look at the cloth that's here. And then the cloth here is totally different. So I'm not quite sure. This, I'm not quite sure. Okay. And then you can kind of see right here where this is right there. But it's not even the same. See how this is tucked in? And this is kind of laid out. So I'm not quite sure about all that. And this is from Johnston Meadows. I am an author, a Christian, and a loving husband and father. Okay? So. Now, the way they handled it, I'm not a fan. Because here, Oh, and then bring this up as well. Who is Pam Colbert? Woman's dog may have been killed with same knife used in the University of Idaho murders. And this was brought up as well. Pam and Jim Colbert's dog Buddy was killed, skinned, and sliced after being let out of their home in Moscow, Idaho on October 21st. Pam, 78, said their beloved Pooch, 12, only had fur left on his legs and face. The dog had reportedly been rescued from a puppy mill. The couple's neighbor, Barbara, discovered the dog. The 4 students were killed just a mile away on November 13th, sparking fears that the same creep may be behind both attacks. We called the sheriff's department, and the supervisor said that Buddy had been skinned. It was like a deer that someone had hunted. They cut around the neck and just skinned him. Okay? Everybody's just very nervous and scared. So, here, the way they handled it has me concerned because the FBI collecting data on crimes against animals, tracking animal cruelty. Acts of cruelty against animals are now counted alongside felony crimes like arson, burglary, assault. And the fact that they had the sorority decide if they wanted to press charges is fucking bullshit and a pussy move. You're supposed to just charge them. That's part of your position as law enforcement, especially when it comes to animal cruelty. On January 1st, the Bureau's National Incident-Based Reporting System, the NIBRS, began collecting detailed data from participating law enforcement agencies on acts of animal cruelty, including gross neglect, torture, organized abuse, and sexual abuse. Before this year, crimes that involved animals were lumped into an all other offenses category in the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting, the UCR. By adding animal cruelty offenses to the NIRBs, law enforcement agencies and the advocacy groups that pushed for the inclusion in the FBI database are hoping the result will reveal a more complete picture of the nature of cruelty to animals. Some studies say that cruelty to animals is a precursor to a larger crime. That's one of the items that we were looking at. Just like with the association for years has cited studies linking animal abuse and other types of animals, most famously murders committed by serial killers like Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and the son of Sam killer David Berkowitz. The organization also points out the overlap animal abuse has with domestic violence and child abuse. If somebody is harming an animal, there's a good chance they are also hurting a human, says John Thompson, Deputy Executive Director of the National Sheriff's Association. If we see patterns of animal abuse, the odds are that something else is going on. So there you go. It is right there. So, with that being said, here, on November 21st, press release, Moscow homicide update. Update information. On the night of the incident, officers located a dog at the residence. The dog was unharmed and turned over to animal services and then released to a responsible party. Rumor control. Detectives are aware of a Latah County Sheriff's Office incident of the report of a skinned dog and have determined it is unrelated to the incident. Contact Latah County Sheriff's Office for further details, which I think I'm going to do that. Let me just write a little mental note on my Post-its. Detectives are also aware of a Moscow police incident of the report of deceased animals left on residents' property. This was determined to be wildlife activity and unrelated to the incident. I don't know about all that. I really don't know about all that. Okay. So here we go. Here is the Crime Data Explorer. And I went ahead and did Idaho. So it's not there. Hold on a second. Animal cruelty. (2017). Okay. So this is of the United States. This is national. And it kind of goes over what we just went over earlier. The methodology, the relationship, how it correlates. And then let's look at state. Idaho. Okay. From, let's do 2021, because that's how far as it goes. 2017. Oh, 2011. And because it's all under that, and they changed it from all violent crimes to now we can do animal cruelty. Okay. And then here's the demographics. It's mostly done at residential homes. And I find it interesting that they don't have the type of weapon involved of the offense. That's pretty important. Okay. Now, let's look at this one. I don't have a date on this, but wild rumor presented on 4chan is that the killers killed a dog and used its blood to mix with their own in a vain attempt to fool L.E. A month ago, a homeowner found their dog had been skinned alive. Supposedly, L.E. never showed up nor investigated thoroughly. Was that the same dog's blood or a different animal? Was there a connection to the 4 murders, or just a lame attempt to explain away weird happenings in Moscow? I don't think that was from that previous dog. I think it was the coyotes or the animals that were found on the premise of 1122 King Road the night of the murder, of the homicide, of the mass murderers. So, take that as you will. Okay. So, she kind of goes
other
into
people
the
would
history
know
of the house.
You know, when they go in for that. So that would be something to, if you're trying to look at the possibility that there's been some surveillance, some stalking, whatever, of the victims, that would increase the possibility. So were there certain people that outside maybe asked to have them as waitresses or something? I mean, that might be an area that they get into. Mm-hmm. The other point I wanted to make that we learned from the from the serial killer study is that some of these offenders, and maybe Gary or Jeff can comment on this, would go into these at night, would go into wherever the crime was going to be committed and get very, very familiar. go around the rooms, get very familiar with things and so forth. We've seen enough of that. So could there have been some of that going on ahead of time? We do know evidently that there had been it was a quote, a party house, but that evidently that night there was not a party that I have seen any information on. People came in.
All right, so there is controversy on that there was people there that night. I just want to bring this up here.
Single friend, anyone who's ever been in that house since those students had moved in, they're going to want to get all kinds of information to put a big picture together. Because right now, at least for us, we look at it, right? We're just seeing small tidbits coming out, and here's the thing: everyone wants to know everything. I understand that, but at the same point, when an investigation is going on, the law enforcement can't share a lot of information, because if they do, they can ruin the investigation. They can taint the investigation. So that's why, unfortunately, you have all your viewers and the people around the nation for every crime. We want to know more. We want to know more. That's human nature, right? But if they came out and started sharing too much, then we're going to get
nothing
things that it could taint the investigation. So yes, they're going to be digging into every possible scenario that we can imagine to rule it out, keep that thread going. Now, if I remember correctly, the second investigation case, it will, to me, again, this is fresh, this is new. The fact that 4 young kids were killed in such a brutal manner in an area where they haven't experienced this before. There's going to be some significant investigative work done by everyone for quite some time. But if they don't get good leads initially, I would say the amount of people working on it is going to fall off, because we're going to have new crimes, new things that are going on, and you can't keep that dedicated.
In Moscow, Idaho, new crimes going on? Okay. So here, we'll get a little bit further.
No, everything that's going. And also, and this I think gets right into the work that you did, the serial killer work, that these people with these kind of missions, they often visit the place and fixate on it and come near it over and over again to get that power, that sense of. So now I'm not saying this is a serial killer necessarily, but I think some of those features may be present here. What do you think about that, Ann?
Yeah, and you reminded me of something. I know that they're looking for, what they should be looking for in the residence is anything missing, because a lot of times they'll take a souvenir, and it might be something like just a driver's license that has the picture on it. So those, I'm hoping that they're looking for that. The problem is you have to have people that know what the victims had.
Right, and now they just sent all their valuables back out of evidence that's in the house. So they sent that all back. And Steve says they were never interviewed, which she didn't live there, Kaylee, so okay, but she may have left something there. I just wanted to bring this up. As she said, like a ID. It could be something as little as a picture ID. So here we go with that. Oh, and this is the hanging sneakers that I mentioned earlier. Back in the old days, bullies steal the shoes off their victims and toss them in the wires, where they cannot be retrieved. Yes, that is one, but here's the shoe tossing. Gang messaging. Shoes on telephone wire are properly said to be linked to organized crime, signifying the location of gang turf, commemorating the death of a gang member or a non-gang member who lived in the area. The shoes are also rumored to mark a spot for drug deals. 2003 newsletter from former Los Angeles, California Mayor James Hahn cited fears of many LA residents that these shoes indicate sites at which drugs are sold, or worse yet, gang turf, and that the city and utility employees had launched a program to remove the shoes. Well, there was definitely some shoes there, and they were removed. All right, so what was I looking at? Oh, the picture IDs. No, that's not it. I'm going to look it up real quick. All right, here we go. Newsweek. This was in April 11th. Smoking gun evidence found in Brian Koberger's home report. One ID that was found is reportedly connected to someone in the home where the slayings occur. Former FBI agent Jennifer Koffendorfer said there was no reason to explain why Koberger had the ID. An ID card connected to the murder of 4 University of Idaho students was reportedly found when authorities searched Brian Koberger's home. Koberger, 28, is accused of breaking into a rental home near the university campus in Moscow in the early hours of November 13th and fatally stabbing Kaylee, Maddie, Zayna, and Ethan. Koberger, then a graduate student at WSU, was arrested at his parents' home in Pennsylvania on December 30th. He has yet to enter a plea, but a lawyer represented him in Pennsylvania, eager to be exonerated. According to the court documents, unsealed last month, ID cards inside a box were among the items police seized during a search of Koberger's parents' home in Albrightsville. News Nation reported that an ID connected to someone from the home where the slayings took place was found during a search. In an appearance on News Nation, former FBI agent Jennifer Koffendorfer said that the ID in question was found concealed inside a glove in a box. If you go to the search warrant return, sure enough, there are these IDs that were concealed in a glove in a box, she said. Now, this is just unusual. Most people don't keep IDs hidden in this fashion, so to me, it was something that certainly corroborated the source information and seemed suspect from the beginning. Koffendorfer said it's not clear who the ID card belongs to, but if it was one of the murder victims, then it could be a smoking gun. If indeed he had the ID in that glove, this is smoking, she said. There is no reason to explain it other than he was in the house and took that during the commission of that crime. It's super strong, especially when you combine it with the sheath that was found next to Matty Mogan with his DNA on the clasp. Koffendorfer has been contacted for further comment. Isn't that wrapped up in a tight little bow, don't you think? It would be significant and damning. The reports of that ID were hidden in a box or a glove compartment could meet that standard, but we need to know the specifics. So there you go. Did they get that? Where'd they get that information? I mean, okay. Moving forward. Are you with me still? We're getting through it. We're almost done. We're almost there. So, here we go with the odd behavior of them saying that Steve may be the killer. It's taken us some time to get there, but I felt it was important to kind of follow through up to this point. So let's go.
Who was perfectly content with that. And so that gives you a little bit of a clue that this is not somebody who just popped and then went, what am I doing here? You know, right? So what did you say, Ann? It suggests a calculating, cold.
Very much so. And the other thing is he had so much time. They didn't discover the bodies until, what was it, almost noon the next day. That's such a disadvantage for law enforcement, because he could have done so much, cleaned up, made sure everything was as it should be. But I think the suicide thing is interesting.
Also, I think the mode of weapon that Gary brings up is fascinating, that if it's a gun being used, the guy is more likely to, for lack of a better term, be a little bit more normal than if it's another weapon that you could read in to the mindset of the person. Another serial killer that comes to mind is Dennis Rader, BTK. He started killing in the early 70s, didn't get caught till he started contacting the media. He needed that attention. One thing I want to bring up with you, this is something that the Navy SEAL brought up, got a lot of attention online. He's also, as I said, a former FBI special agent. He looks at things like Jeff does as an investigator, former FBI, right? So he's looking at odd behavior, and the white guy in the hoodie that we can talk about in a few minutes, or the on-again, off-again boyfriend of Kaylee's, who they made 9 or 10 phone calls to in that window of time before the killings and after the killings. We can talk about that person. But Kaylee Gonzalez's father, Stephen Gonzalez, cannot seem to stay quiet. And that raised the antenna of this Navy SEAL and FBI special agent. And he's now hired his own attorney, his own investigator. He's revealing information that even the police aren't revealing. And when I had this Navy SEAL, Jonathan Gillum is his name, on the show, I happened to have a quote, a pretty lengthy quote from Steve Gonzalez. And I read this quote that he issued to the media. And Jonathan stopped me after I read this quote, and I should have brought it. I didn't, my mistake. He said, you know what you just read? And I said, yeah, I read a quote from Steve Gonzalez. He said, no, you didn't. You just read the movements of a killer, because it talked about how this person went in through the slider, went upstairs, went downstairs, went downstairs, went upstairs. So Jonathan is by no means saying the father is the killer. He says we've seen very crazy things in the past, and that family members are capable of killing family members. He just wants to make sure this person is ruled out. Anne, you're the woman. You've got the longest history. What is your reaction to that?
Well, it certainly is something that law enforcement usually looks at in a case, and Jeff can back me up on that, because especially when there's been the type of killing. But it would be why would he be a mass murderer? I could see one or two, maybe two, but I've never seen. Well, I shouldn't say I've never seen. Certainly, you have mass murderer family, somebody that will murder their whole family. And it is usually a lot of people. But given what I've seen coming from the media and his reporting, you'd have to rule out that he's just a frantic and a grieving father. It's his only child, if I remember correctly.
No, he has a daughter, but yeah.
He does have a daughter. Okay, so
another.
Yeah. But I'm not convinced. That's not convincing me to go down that avenue.
Jeff, your thoughts on that?
Well, it was funny because I remember when that quote was released in the news, and my fiance and I, she also spent 21 years like I did in the FBI, and she actually worked as the behavioral analysis coordinator for the Boston office. And we both kind of said, that's very odd. So again, with Ann, I'm not saying, and the former agent you spoke to, not saying he's the person, but it's odd. And it would be something that we would, in law enforcement, take a long look at to rule out, to find out because I find it hard to believe that law enforcement would share some of those details about what took place in the house with the family.
And Gary, you're again the psychologist. You deal mostly with the killer side of things, but there's no real way to know how a parent's going to react to the tragic murder of a daughter, right? I mean, could it just be that he's acting strange because of what just happened?
It's impossible to tell based on what's objectively observable here, because who knows the motives of the human heart, But when you're dealing with people that are not in that sort of rarer end of the spectrum of human behavior, that aren't, psychopaths and sadists, things like that, usually the motives are things that, even if they're a little unusual, we can relate to them on some level. There's some human kind of something in there that would make sense if the person had an opportunity to explain it. But I don't think that's what we're dealing with the killer in this case. The killer in this case, I don't think too many of us would understand exactly what motivated this person. And because I can understand being upset because of envy or jealousy or something like that. But the difference is that you wouldn't, in the cold light of reason, after planning, perpetrate an act like that unless on top of it was a grudge and a kind of a sense that all these people are lumped together like you were going to war, like the way that the human brain can lump a whole group of people together as the enemy and kill any one of them because they happen to have a certain uniform on. Is that kind of thing. And in that sense, I'm reminded, Jeff, of what we were talking about the idea of like sending a message to the rest of the gang. Because if you think about it, if this person is motivated.
So I brought it up again, or brought this into about lumping them all into a gang, having fraternity influence into the military, but also just lumping them in all at once. And also with the information when it comes to what is considered a gang. And that kind of brought me to with fraternities. Which is this one, I want to say. And it is not this one, it is gangs in the military. We went over some of that, but here we go. From current slide. Gang members in the United States military. Although military communities are generally more stable and secure than their civilian counterparts, they are not immune from gang activity. Recent data suggests that the rise of gang activity has been pronounced in the military than in the nation at large. All right, and then I just wanted to find where I could find the definition of. And then here we are, the junior enlistment of men or civilian dependents stationed in the United States. And then the CID and NGIC reports both emphasize the involvement of dependent children of service members in gang activity on or near military installations. Military children are targets for gang membership because their families' transient nature often makes them feel isolated, vulnerable, and in need of companionship. Murder, assault, and robbery complete the list of felonies that gang members in the military reportedly commit. Killings are often linked to inter or intra-gang conflicts. Gang members in the military also commit lesser crimes of vandalism, domestic disturbance, and money laundering. Gang-related vandalism has attracted the most media attention because of the graffiti. And then I went over this earlier. Let's see. So they have a definition of what a gang is, and it's basically a group of people that have the same identifying factors where they're all there for one purpose, which is for their particular group, like how a fraternity does. And there's initiations that go on in order to become part of the gang, and there's a whole typology of it. This was in this, I thought I had outlined it, and I will definitely go through with it just to show that my work was completed, that I did my homework, because I did. And let's see here. But I will go ahead, and once I go through all these and video them and drop them, I will bring that up and show that, yes, I kind of see there's a correlation of fraternities almost being like a gang is what I'm trying to say. Is it possible? Is it probable? Why not? At this point, looking at this and with hazing and that aspect, that's what kind of brought my understanding where I got that initiation, the hazing aspect, is where I came up with this as I was reading it. I can't find it at this point. We're probably a couple hours in, so let's just keep it moving, and I will definitely bring it up in another video of me reading them. So let's keep it moving. Keep it moving, keep it moving. So
in the way I think he is, then isn't part.
Okay, so let's do. So there you go, about Steve, how they think he's the killer because he knew, he was kind of talking about it, and Anne and Gary are both are no. We kind of do the same thing. We kind of visualize what's going on with the information that we get. That's a normal human reaction, especially when it comes from a grieving father. Okay.
And Anne, the Navy SEAL we had on, he gets into the details, stuff that I would never think of, but he says he believes that these people were mounted when stabbed to death. I assume that would an autopsy review...
How is he not the killer for saying that? I mean, hello, they were mounted? Where did he get that from?
Feel that? Would that say something one way or the other about the profile of the killer, as opposed to stabbing them while standing up or mounting them? What does that tell you?
They should, that may well be able to tell from the angle that the wound is, and how, again, if it's not a lot, if these wounds run together, that's what we're really waiting to see, because you've really had two different divergent opinions. One is there was a lot of blood around, and others where there wasn't. I mean, if these young people went in to find them at noon that next morning and they had to call other people because they thought they were unconscious, it couldn't have been a lot of blood. I mean, I would have thought they would have been horrified initially and called, more than just other friends. So again, that's going to come, and sounds like that was the second floor. The third floor, we've talked about that, seems to be where certainly the Kaylee was and so forth. But I think autopsy is going to tell us a number of things. Absolutely.
Back to the Gonzalez's for a minute, and I definitely don't want to pick on them, but this is stuff that other viewers picked up. This person whose name I cut off says, and Gary, I'd love your take on this. I know you don't want to speculate, and I absolutely respect that, but this commenter says the sister of Kaylee in her first interview and the affect of her father all along have been very odd to me. The words they would say right at the beginning about the gory specifics of the crime with zero emotion, I could not relate. I've been trying to chalk it all up to potentially them being on medication, ? That all being said, I agree with Jonathan, who is our guest, that you cannot rule anyone or anything out at this point. Your thoughts?
Well, look, again, let's be careful here. But what I will say is, in general terms, is that there have been cases that I've looked at, read about, where people are traumatized and the trauma limits their effective expression. It's a DSM, kind of diagnostic feature of PTSD or trauma, that there's a kind of flattening of the emotional experience and numbing, so that you can't read into that.
Defense mechanism.
I think it's important not to do that. I mean, from a mental health perspective, the danger of doing that is interpreting somebody who might be traumatized.
See, this is what I'm saying. They're gaslighting this family because they're not keeping quiet the way they want them to, and they're asking questions because we know they like to be questioned. They're coming out and say these things and putting it out there that they're possibly the ones that are involved because they aren't acting the way that you believe they should act. Because the way that you think that you should act in an instance ends up probably more than likely not being the way that you actually act. You like to think you're going to act this way, and then when it actually happens to you, you probably don't even act even close to that.
Experiencing something in a painful way as being involved in some way in it, and that's something I think we should be very careful not to do until all the details of this case have emerged.
Can I add something to that?
Absolutely.
After 9/11, I spoke to a lot of the family members. One of my initial jobs after 9/11 was to interview the people who dropped off their loved ones that got onto the flights in Boston and flew out of Boston. Mm-hmm. Gary's absolutely right. You just lost your daughter, your son. Parents are not...
And 9/11 is definitely different than this type of instance. You can't really compare the two. That's like apples to oranges. Yes, it's traumatic in sense, but it's totally different. You can't lump these generalizations of these types of acts that happen to people's families. It's not responsible at all. I can't even hear him at this point. It's so
I agree that the killer had to mount these victims to stab them, but has anyone also considered that there were two bad actors with same type weapons?
And that's when I mentioned before in that paper about the mounting, how he had to kill them. The mounting, I feel, is maybe them hiding the fact that it was purposefully done that way.
And same type shoes. He was bold to enter a home with 6 individuals in there, risking that they might all wake up and see them. Even if the killer or killers killed some, they couldn't kill all 6 at once, and one of them would have gotten away. I still think there were 2. Ann?
Well, and that's not an uncommon response. We heard that initially. You're always never wanted to just say it was one, and that certainly theoretically you could have one going on one floor and one going on another floor. I suppose that it wouldn't have to even be one person that did all 4.
And that's what I was saying with 2. I believe there are 2 different targets, Maddie and Ethan. because of the wounds that Xana and Kaylee had. That's my personal opinion. It'll be easy to lump them all in one, like a perfect little bow in a box, but I don't know if that actually happened. My personal opinion, allegedly.
So I think that's now this is where the DNA may help if they can get it, if there isn't too much merging of the samples, where they would see enough different ones, all obviously different from the victims.
Okay, and then they talk about the gang affiliation again.
Murder in the database, you could count on a couple of hands the number of mass murders that were committed by a team, unless it was as part of a criminal enterprise or a gang enterprise. Very unusual for a person to commit mass murder with a partner. And again, you get right back to that point that would imply the ability to form an even perverse allegiance or alliance between two people that would imply a friendship or connectivity or intimacy. And these
which could be fraternal, a fraternity. So here we go further with that.
Kind of type of serial killing from the 1960s, particularly to the 1990s. And the second thing has to do with this, and it gets into a philosophical thing, but it's important. Whatever one believes about religion, culture, modes of thought, whatever, they have a way of gluing the identity together and giving one a sense of purpose and boundaries and inhibition. And what happens to a culture when you take them away and you let people have a lot more grayness is that you start to see an existential void where people have no sense of why they exist apart from something that they're doing, like the person they're dating, the job they have, the school they go to, the character they are on social media, whatever. And what happens is, in mass murder especially, is that when that thing is taken from them, they explode. That when you study mass murder, you see that it's all about what was that thing that you were deprived of, right? Did some political figure you venerate, fall from grace, and now you don't have them to identify with anymore? Did you lose your wife? Did you lose your husband? Did you lose your scholarship? Did you lose so that's a common trigger in that type of individual, the mass murderer, who then is so enraged and so jealous and so envious that they will go out and take it away from everybody else. But so you want to understand that thing of that kind of taking away of boundaries has had a very enormous effect on personality structure and the average individual. So that what you actually start to see is that the culture can become more narcissistic and unboundaried and disinhibited. And then that paves the way, in conjunction with new technology, for all kinds of growing new awful types of crime. And you know that it's cultural because it doesn't happen in every country to the same degree. I mean, a lot of this is decidedly American phenomenon. So that, we have to ask ourselves, what is going on in the collective pot we share that is heating us all up like this. And but I think that, in my mind, this killing has a very modern flavor to it.
So interesting.
And that's why I wanted to bring that up. I brought that up before with the fraternity and the hazing in the fraternal order, and also now that he's bringing it up with the gangs, with with Jeff, and the political aspect of it, could also infer as well some intersectionality with the domestic terrorism, which is in the gangs in the military. Again, I'm going to bring that up. And this is on 7:15. Okay. Do I have to go back a little bit? All right, so second, the anti-extremist policy faces possible constitutional challenges. Under the regulations, a unit commander may order soldiers not to participate in those activities that are contrary to good order and discipline or morale of the unit or pose a threat to the health, safety, and security of military personnel or a military installation. This broad grant of authority raises questions about what constitutes a legal permissibility, speech-limiting command. Several commentators have asserted that commanders' power to restrict speech and association rights in the name of anti-extremism violates First Amendment protections. The First Amendment, they argue, secures soldiers' right to both verbal and nonverbal speech, including wearing attire or association with a group that falls into gray areas of permissibility. This critique seems oversighted given the Supreme Court's deference to the military in matters related to administrative actions that burden speech. The military has time and again successfully defended speech restrictive orders that would violate the First Amendment in the civilian context. Nevertheless, the commentators are right to note that the breadth of the anti-extremist regulation could create some constitutional problems. In every case in which a soldier has challenged an order or administrative action on First Amendment grounds, courts have required the government to show that its restricted soldiers' speech no more than is reasonable necessary to protect substantial governmental interests. The anti-extremist regulations fail to ensure that commanders' orders comply with this test because they do not require a commander to articulate the negative impact that the regulated speech has on good order and discipline. Without this requirement, a commander may restrict speech or expression simply because it is irregular or unseemly. In such an instance, there would be little justification or judicial deference to the commander's discretion. Constitutional considerations may thus complicate the implementation of the anti-extremist regulations, especially in gang-related matters where the military has not precisely divined what most threatens unit cohesion. Third, even assuming that the anti-extremist provisions apply to gang activity and are constitutional, they give inadequate guidance and support to commanders. Under PAM 600-15, the implementing pamphlet for AR 620, commanders are told to maintain constant vigilance to foil any attempts by extremists to further their cause through the Army. More specifically, they are charged with fostering an extremist-free unit climate, educating soldiers, detecting and investigating potential problems, and enforcing the anti-extremist policies. So, PAM 615 recommends that commanders encourage soldiers to examine personal viewpoints in light of the Army's values and loyalty to their military team, avoid extremist affiliations and views, and report specific indicators. The pamphlet also advises commanders to work with junior leads to keep abreast of soldiers' surreptitious meetings of off-duty clothing, music selections, reading materials, computer use, and personal display of extremist symbols. Beyond these general suggestions, however, 615 provides very little guidance on how commanders should operate or for what exactly they are looking. For example, what constitutes extremist off-duty clothing, what is extremist music, what computer use is improper. The lack of specificity is complicated by the pamphlet's suggestion that commanders consider requesting assistance from the military police or criminal investigation command only in serious and/or complex cases. So, a lot to unpack there. Now, as we talked about extremist groups, domestic terrorism like white supremacy, here is a picture of let's hope I have the right section because I tried to organize. Should be either in this one or ROTC. So, no, I don't have it in here, the ones that I thought I would. So let's see. And it's one of the fraternities got reported because they were hanging up a Confederate flag on their fraternity, which they felt that was within their right. Let me see if I have it right away here in one of these. Not this one. I'm sure I can just Google it. Alpha Gamma Rho accused of displaying Confederate flag by University of Idaho alumna. Fraternity members say the object was a gray blanket, not a flag. Hello, gaslighting. You didn't see that. You saw a gray blanket. Let's see. And this is, she saw a Confederate flag hanging in the window as she drove past Alpha Gamma Rho on October 19th. And this is in the year 2020. She didn't have time to take a picture at the time, but when she returned later, the flag was no longer there. Shafe's boyfriend, a current UI student, saw the flag as well, she said. She said the flag was hanging in the top floor, farthest right window if you're facing the building. Benjamin Uptmore, president of AGR, said he ran around the house on October 20th looking for the flag but could not find it anywhere. He took photos of the house with timestamps before going to class for the day. Upmore searched all members' rooms at around 6:30 a.m. that day and conducted a more thorough search of the house with executive board members later in the day. He said he contacted AGR's national organization and their chapter advisor, Zane Gardner, telling them he was aware of Shafe's post but did not find a flag. Gardner then contacted Nick O'Neill, director of UI Fraternity and Sorority Life, and determined that AGR members would have a mandatory meeting to discuss the situation and why they wouldn't have a Confederate flag in the chapter house. O'Neill responded to Chafe on October 21st, thanking her for bringing the issue to his attention, encouraging her to reach out to him if any other issues arose, and saying his office had... I really hate when people do that. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. And, feel free to keep reaching out. Well, no shit. Other issues arose, saying his office had taken immediate action to connect with the chapter leadership and their national organization to address this holistically. I have seen people consider the Confederate flag as a piece of history and heritage and doesn't represent hate, Upmore said. And they believe that it is their First Amendment right to be able to fly the flag. The other side that I have seen with the Confederate flag is that it is a symbol of hate and that it stands for oppression and white supremacy. These two very different views make it a sort of a gray area in society because there is such a contrast in beliefs instead of one common thought about it. Upmore said he'd be willing to have a conversation with Shafe about the issue. Shafe was not contacted again after O'Neill's email, but she said she plans to reach out to the Greek Council about the issue. She hopes the university will hold AGR responsible for their actions. Notice how that all we just went through just kind of encompasses what's been said, what's been going on, these other gray aspects, fraternity with the hazing, and now with this. All very interesting, to say the least. So, now,
I can tell you there's plenty of times where you collect stuff and then also now we're responsible.
Now they're talking about giving back the items. And how, personally, I believe that is too soon. I'm not an investigator. I'm not in criminal justice in that aspect. But I would think that you would keep all those items in an ongoing case. You would not give any of those items back because it's an ongoing investigation. That's where I would come through objectively. If you have an ongoing case of a quadruple mass murder going on, you're keeping all the items. You're keeping the house the way it is. Not cleaning it up and taking things out. I understand if there is blood on the mattress and on the box spring, like they're saying, I would think, why wouldn't you just rip out a sample? Like, take a picture, draw a marker around the area that you're taking out, take a picture, cut it, take a picture, bag it, and then send it, and then leave it there. And then have a marking showing sample taken out of the box spring for laboratory use. I mean, I just saw that at the top of my head. I mean, how can you not keep it the way that it's supposed to be, the crime scene? Leave it alone. Get out. So that it's an ongoing investigation. And now we don't have all these items and we have things taken out. I can see why the Goncalves are worried that it's going to be a cold case because all the evidence is gone. And they're trying to get rid of the house to boot. It's all very strange, all very odd. And if this is standard procedure, well, then maybe Steve is right. Some protocols need to be changed. As I was saying in the FBI symposium, some things work and should stay, like putting stuff in the data systems, yes. But how things are handled, like giving back items, no. That is a crime scene. Everything stays in there. Even personal artifacts, like I can understand maybe Dylan and Bethany had maybe their rings or necklaces, some type of personal artifacts that were given to them or passed down from a family member. I can understand that. But we have it. It's in our safekeeping. It's going to have to wait. It's going to have to wait because, as they said, that whole house was a crime scene. So that includes Dylan and Bethany's room. But now you're taking everything out, then you're kind of almost wiping the slate clean. Very unfortunate.
Responsible for it. If I don't need it, I'm going to get it.
How do you not know you're going to need it in the future? Especially when it wasn't done correctly in the first place. All right. We're going to go forward a little bit. Gary leaves. He's going out to dinner.
And that's when it comes to working the gang cases, people say, I just can't believe that the gang members will do it. Well, yes, they do it because they don't have the same thoughts that we do, I think we're all pretty much aware that gang members don't think like us, that they're all on a whole different spectrum. We get that. Please don't talk to me like we're dumb. Law-abiding citizens. They are career criminals, and this is their life. And this person has now, if he hasn't already done so, or she, if it was a woman, looks more like a man to me just because the violence, the knife, to be able to do it to 4 people, leads more to being a man. But all right, so let's get into more here about Kaylee's vehicle that they bring up as a question. And here's her response. Direction that could help them develop new leads and help solve something, but they will do it with their computer and really sit down.
Next comment for you, Anne, from Carol Abrego. Hi, enjoyed the show. Your mother, this one here, is adorable. This is the second show I've seen so far. Kaylee had just purchased a new vehicle. Is it a possibility that someone at the car dealership became fixated on her? She's a beautiful girl. She would have given all her information to someone in the finance department. No doubt they would have detailed information and cleaned the vehicle for her. Maybe someone from housekeeping noticed her on the way to the powder room. I do believe this case will be solved by modern day science and technology. Your reaction to that, Anne?
Oh, I think that's really important. That's someone that's really paying attention, and it should be checked out. There could be something like Jeff just said, that might be one little thing that is noticed, and that can be enlarged. I say go for it.
And another one for you, and Jeff can follow up on this. And this is from Town Trekker. Another great interview. I've wondered for days.
All right, first, let's look at what the car aspect in 4chan. If you believe power gets protected, Shoup theory makes some sense. He's part of the Shoup family who theoretically founded the state of Ohio. There's been... Oh, and I didn't do them in order. Rumors about him because of this. Eli Shoup was her local area rep. Her sales resulted in much more money to the higher ups. She got the car. Shoup made advances. She was going to tell everyone she recruited. Because #MeToo is so deeply embedded in the culture of Idaho, then a man's career would have been ruined if word got out that he'd hit on a local party girl. And all the dozens of hundreds of people who supposedly did business with Kaylee are now too embarrassed about buying an energy drink to tell anyone now. Right? So, who knows? Who knows at this point? I'm bringing up this because here's Anna. This is liked by Maddie Mogan. Fall formal. And here is Beth, who is now engaged. And I find it interesting that she's engaged because she's kept quiet. So therefore, I'm sure someone's going to sweep her up because she's kept quiet with no showings of any type of social media. She's not part of the Venmo. She's not part of any of that dialogue. She kept everything pretty down low. So down low that she has very little of a digital evidence about her. So she's definitely getting swooped up from someone, because she can keep quiet. So that will definitely work for a particular group of people who like to stay underground and not be heard or seen. So let me see. And here's another one from 4chan. We know who did it. Stop blaming Brian for something he didn't do. Quinn did Maddie, drug money, greed. Loach did Ethan and Xana, jealousy, lust. Junior did Kaylee, revenge for Hannah, wrath. Barry has the 13 Elantra. Junior has the 2017 Sonata seen on the Exxon CCTV. Dylan is the one running to Quinn's truck because Dylan hid that knife for Quinn because Quinn didn't have time to hide it. Because Dylan turned those lights on in that hallway and she saw Quinn with the knife in his hand. She is going to get backed into a corner in her lies and confess on the stand. Accessory before and after the fact. Junior was hidden in the 3rd floor attic. Quinn was hidden in the closet. It was a surprise hum rush attack. Where have you all been since November? Do you want justice? Which, that's a theory. And here is the hand signals that are affiliated with if you just type in MS13 gang sign, there you go. There you go. And as I said, it started as an American gang, and now it's become more South American. That does not mean that Americans are no longer part of that. Okay, there we go. There we go. So, with that being said, we all know about the Proud Boys, so on and so forth, with their, hand signals as well. So we have that one. And part of that eco, which Kaylee's Lincoln has a lot of controversy around it with the eco shield, if she's part of that. Here you see Jack Showalter and one of the Shoup brothers, and there's that Jesse guy, which is all could be far-fetched, but it is a small town with close ties and intersectionality, as we're learning. And when 4 people get murdered, people are going to get questioned, and hopefully the right people get questioned. Not some rando from Washington State University who grew up in Pennsylvania. Where in the heck did all my... I believe it shows up with another eco shield, and it's an owner of that company, and he has the hand signal. I did show that, I want to say it was right in the beginning. Okay, and here was what I was saying with him looking a lot like him, January 6th, and then Brian Kohlberger. There it is. And so here is another hand signal with Eco Shield. Are we reading too much into it? We'll never know. Hopefully we'll know. Hopefully we'll get figured out. All we're just doing here is educating ourselves, understanding that it may be plausible, may be possible. Doesn't mean that any of this is actual truth, but where there's smoke, there's fire, and as we learn through our papers, it is a possibility, and it could be plausible. But we are educating ourselves here. So, moving forward with that, very interesting aspect here. And we're going into the home stretch.
Victim's sister, I think it was Kaylee, verified the police timeline was wrong. It goes on and on and on.
All right, and then they talk about another timeline that is wrong.
This time, it's hard to say. All I know is that, yeah, could it be wrong? It could be. But could they be wrong? Yes, they could. No, the police aren't going to release everything they have. They can't. And because of that, we're just going to go, I'm going to go with their timeline until I have absolute direct evidence of, yes, we've pinged the phone. But they've got their timeline, they're working it, and if they may have their own change.
And they also brought up about Ethan as well. And she's going to bring it up, Anne.
The legend when it comes to this kind of crime. What is next, and what are your final thoughts on where we stand right now?
Well, I was just going to comment that if the house was under surveillance by the killer, and he sees the Ethan and the girl Zena go in last, that might have meant something to him. He might have waited, then gone in. How does he get in? Those kinds of things. So I do think that is important to try to see what it means in that he's the killer went to his floor first. He would be the greatest threat, We know that in a multiple victim that they go after the greatest threat first, which makes sense. So that may all fit in there if you have somebody that's there watching and surveilling the house, or maybe even in the house, who knows. So that would just be my comment on that. And then what's next?
Which is very poignant. I love that, because that would, with the wounds of Xana being defensive, as well as Kaylee possibly being a defensive, that the target was Maddie and also Ethan. He's the biggest threat. Xana is damage control, to silence, or an opportunistic time, as well with Maddie. Maddie was the target, I believe, because her mother got called down to be interviewed for her murder. Kaylee's parents were not called down to be questioned about her murder, but Maddie's mother was, which tells me more than likely she is the target. To find out why she was targeted, which I can understand why the Goncalves are pissed. They're not even being interviewed to see, because they could be used as a way to be helped to understand the both of them. They were pretty much sisters. They were very close. And now they're separating the two. They're trying to put a wedge in this mass murder by putting a wedge in those two murders that could very well have intersectionality. As we have seen with Jeff kind of wedge away how the MS-13 gang and the 18th Street gang were American, but now it's more of a third world, and now they use machetes and knives. Putting in those wedges to kind of split the truth, trying to split the hairs. So I like that she said that it makes sense that if he was being surveilled, the house, and that they would go after Ethan first. He's the biggest. He's the most threat. And if you remember on the affidavit, as well as part of the MS or the MPD news release, they made it sound like he was visiting, that he just happened to be there that night, to make it almost sound like it just happened because he just happened to be there. Just like Kaylee, she just happened to be there. They definitely believe they're clever. Let me just hear about them talking about him, because this is the first time I heard this.
Cops were then wrong when they kept their original timeline, saying all cell phone, but it looked just like what you'd use in a bombing, and they were really grateful. So all these tips happen, and along those lines, we've got one last comment, and we'll wrap it up. For a while now, a student's mother has been saying that her son texted with Ethan, that's Ethan Chapin, near 2 a.m. And from Ethan's reply, the son is sure he was still at the party around 2 a.m. Cops were then wrong when they kept their original timeline, saying all four were home at 1:45 a.m. 24 hours after the bodies were found, one victim's sister, I think it was Kaylee, verified the police timeline was wrong. It goes on and on and on.
So there you go. Ethan with the text messages, and Kaylee's sister Olivia with the timeline. And Anne brings up some very good points. She also brings up another good point here that I will get into, and this will be the end of it with this whole section. And I will follow through with those papers that I mentioned before.
Captured everybody's attention, and we all should work as we can to try. There are 4 victims, and I would say there's another victim in a different respect, and that's a school. The University of Idaho has taken a terrible lost 4 of their students, but it has an effect on them. And not only the community, but the university. So my being in a university, I know what this would mean if, it happened, anything that happens on our campus. It can be a very, minor kind of a thing. So I think we should keep that in mind too.
And I think that's an amazing point, not to mention Washington State University is just 8 miles away. So you've got these two really big university towns. Moscow is only a town of 26,000 people. Their lives have been turned upside down. If you don't know who she is, you better Google. And
all right, so with that being said, one last paper, and then I'm wrapping this up. And I highlighted a hard copy, so I will just do the highlighted points. So this is the International Journal of Education Integrity, which I found very fascinating. Downs International Journal of Educational Integrity. This is from 2017. Department of Management and Quantitative Methods, Illinois State University. Abstract. A review of the literature on corporate governances serves to demonstrate the applicability of many governances solutions to the university setting. Based on a review of university scandals, most of which are recent but some of which took place decades ago, it is possible to categorize them as follows: sex scandals, drugs, cheating, hazing, admissions, and diplomas, on-the-job consumption, athletics, and murder. Several examples are provided in the paper, along with their impact on various stakeholders. The paper then discusses a variety of solutions designed to either preemptive the activities potentially leading to scandal, to deter them, or to punish perpetrators. Some of these involve structural changes, institutional policies and procedures, fines, terminations, and sanctions. The paper emphasizes the proactive safeguards which govern and monitor to make sure that universities do not suffer on the back end and that their reputations do not suffer into the future. While growing pressure on higher education institutions because of decreasing student numbers and the increasing need for external funds, emphasis on managing an institution's reputation is stronger than ever. Universities spend a lot of money and resources and time to build their reputations, only to see those reputations damaged due to the negligence or indiscretions of a select few. Reduced enrollment, student defections, and donor withdrawal are some of the ways in which damaged university reputations are manifested when government fails in its responsibilities to monitor and take corrective action before reputations begins to suffer. There you go. The risk of losing a hard-earned reputation necessitates strong institutional governance. Okay. So, I'm just going to leave it there, because this whole paper is very informative, and it definitely shows and highlights what has happened with the University of Idaho and how they kind of just passed the hot potato over to Washington State University. They deflected it over to them, and then they almost made like a team effort so they can both just be abolished of what the hell's going on, and so they can move over and continue until winter break is over, December 30th. They got their man. Now we can resume. Class is back in session. So there you go. This is the final of Steve Gonsalves and Jeff Woods and Jonathan Gillum saying how he could possibly be the murderer that got me to do this channel and do those papers on sexual homicide and non-sexual homicide with the help of learning from Ann Burgess and my buddy Gary, who I was calling David for the longest time, and getting some really good information from these two who are very seasoned and experienced. They continue working and listening to FBI agents up to this point. So now what I see that I'm going to do to keep the ball rolling and to help not make this a cold case, which is what we all are afraid that happen, because many of us believe that Brian Koberger is not the person who they say did this. If they did, I feel if he did, then they really lacked on collecting the information and investigating the way they should have right from the get-go, even with all the money and all their resources. It's very sad and unfortunate. If he is the killer, then he's going to get away with it because they did not conduct themselves professionally or appropriately. The fact that Ethan Chapin's parents had to alert the press that this had happened is very telling to me. It's very telling to everyone. They literally got caught with their pants down because someone said something. I truly believe they wanted to just sweep this under the rug and not say anything because Ethan's a fraternity member, that they would just keep quiet. But you don't know what families are going to do, especially when it concerns this. This is major, this is huge, and it's very sad. It's very scary with what I've learned and uncovered with the possible intersectionality of gangs being involved in not only fraternities, but also in the military, and how all of them can be intertwined throughout the years, that this has been an issue. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for getting this far. I appreciate you, and I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I learned doing this as well. So thank you very much, and please subscribe, like, hit the notification button for those other papers that I'll be doing and dropping those videos as well, and we'll see what happens. Until next time.